Chapter 673. In the metaphysics world, magical tools like seals usually had a suppressive power, and the celestial master seal's suppressive power was even stronger. Just as my seal was about 1 foot away from little Wang Li, ripples appeared on the deep pit in his chest and kept shrinking. It was obvious that the aura in the pit was extremely afraid of my seal. But at this moment, I controlled the seal to stop. I didn't dare to move forward, although the seal could restrain the aura in the pit. The problem was that the pit was on little Wang Li's chest, which was related to his life. If I used too much force, not only would it disperse the aura in the pit, but it would also hurt little Wang Li. Little Wang Li's tendons and veins had become extremely tough under Zhang Canwen and my care. However, under my celestial master true essence, he couldn't resist at all. Thus, I could only control my true essence to a very small extent and grope forward, slowly approaching little Wang Li's body. As the seal approached, a light in the shape of the Big Dipper appeared on little Wang Li's chest. It carried the aura of the 7-star mugwort. It was obviously the formation that Zhang Canwen had used the 7-star mugwort to set up. Very quickly, my celestial master seal shone with a fluorescent light and condensed into the shape of a seal, pressing down on the dark pit. The Big Dipper and the seal got closer and closer. Then, they collided and merged into the black pit one after the other. During the whole process, I carefully controlled the amount of true essence I used and didn't cause any harm to little Wang Li. After I was done, I lifted my head and saw the little fellow looking at me curiously with his black eyes. I reached out to touch his head and carefully sensed him. The evil-ine energy on his body was still there, but it had dissipated a lot compared to before. I exhaled in relief. Although the process of setting up the seal was difficult, it was very smooth. With this seal, little Wang Li shouldn't have any problems in the short term. Even if Zhang Canwen didn't come back for 10 days or half a month, it would be fine. Of course, this seal couldn't be done once and for all. After this period of time, I would have to wait for Zhang Canwen to come back and nourish his body every day. After dealing with this matter, I held Wang Li in my arms and took him downstairs to the lobby. Although the wrath of heaven a few days ago had a great impact on the antique city, fortunately, it was at night and it was quickly settled. It didn't affect the business of the metaphysics shop much. At this time, the hall on the first floor was still bustling as usual. Seeing me come downstairs, Wang Kuen's wife hurried to welcome me. She took the little fellow from my arms and thanked me profusely. Instead, Wang Kuen walked over from afar. He looked at me and asked softly, "Mr. Little Zhou, are you leaving?" How did he know about this? I found it a bit strange, but I still nodded and replied, "Yes, in these 2 days." Upon hearing that, Wang Kuen heaved a sigh of relief. That's good. Before Mr. Zhang left, he told me that Mr. Little Zhou might be leaving in the next 2 days. He asked me to keep you here for a while longer. At the latest, he will be back around dinner time. Zhang Canwen was coming back today. This was good news. Although I had already placed a restriction on little Wang Li, it was still better to have Zhang Canwen by his side to protect him. However, why did Zhang Canwen insist on keeping me here until he came back? I didn't seem to understand what he meant. Since I couldn't get anything from Wang Kuen, I could only put this matter aside for the time being. Fortunately, Lu Jinyan's appointment with me was 2 days later. I wasn't in a hurry to leave today, so I could naturally wait until Zhang Canwen came back in the evening. The day passed quickly. When it was dinner time, Zhang Canwen's figure appeared outside the shop on time. He looked to be in very good condition. His clothes were ragged, and there were a few bloodstains on his neck. It looked like he had just experienced a fierce battle. Upon seeing him in such a state, Wang Kuen and his wife went forward first. They immediately asked Zhang Canwen what had happened and how he ended up in such a state. Xie Chenghua and Lu Chuanda, who were a few steps behind, were shocked when they saw Zhang Canwen's state. Wang Kuen and his wife weren't cultivators, so they didn't know what the celestial master realm represented. However, Xie Chenghua and Lu Chuanda were very clear about it. In a situation where it didn't involve a blessed land, a celestial master was almost an immortal-like existence in a mortal world. However, after not seeing him for 5 days, Zhang Canwen was in such a sorry state. He seemed to be seriously injured. Everyone couldn't help but feel strange. Following behind the crowd, I quickly went to welcome him. Before I could open my mouth, after Zhang Qianwen noticed me, he didn't care about Wang Kuan and the others. He grabbed my hand and walked upstairs. "Big brother Zhang, what happened to you?" I didn't know what he meant, so I asked curiously. Zhang Qianwen continued to walk upstairs, but his tone wasn't anxious. He said, "Nothing. I just want to get something." "Something?" I asked again, "What is it?" At this moment, we had reached the second floor. Zhang Qianwen didn't answer. He stopped at the door of a room and took the lead to push the door open. After I followed him in, he took out something from his pocket and handed it to me. "This is it." I lowered my head to look. It was a black iron ruler that was around 2 feet long and less than 1 inch wide. The side of the iron ruler facing me had been carved with small seal characters. As soon as the iron ruler appeared, the temperature in the room dropped significantly. It was as if the iron ruler was covered in ice. "Try it." Before I could understand what it was, Zhang Qianwen handed me the iron ruler. I extended my hand to receive it. As soon as I touched the iron ruler, I felt a cold air crawl up my arm. However, it didn't harm me in any way. Instead, the cold air made me feel very comfortable. My heart seemed to calm down. I held the iron ruler and studied it for a while. Then, I realized that the words carved on the ruler were a poem of the 7 absolute poems. The universe is vast. The sun and the moon are long in the mountains and forests. Breaking the beach to pass the swallow's tail, cutting the stone to cut the sheep's intestines. Pangu's surname is Li, Lu Shan's surname is Kong. Famous people always meddle in other people's business. Once drunk, the waves are vast. I couldn't understand the meaning of the poem. However, as I read it, I felt a sense of tranquility. No wonder it could calm me down. I lifted my head. Zhang Qianwen clasped his hands behind his back and continued. "This iron ruler is called the mysterious Yin ruler. It's also called the calming ruler. It said that our ancestor took the mysterious iron from the heavens to make it. It was born with the ability to calm people's minds. Later on, our ancestor refined it and made it our mount when's inherited magical weapon. Its power isn't inferior to the yin-yang yama brush. However, our mount when's inheritance declined, and this magical weapon fell into someone else's hands. My master had been searching for it for many years. 7 years ago, he received news about it. That year, my master took me and one Fei to ask for it, but the results weren't satisfactory. However, that senior said that within 10 years, if someone from our mount could break through to the heavenly master realm and defeat him, he would return the mysterious Yin ruler. During these 5 days, I went to that senior's place to fulfill our promise. I took the mysterious Yin ruler back. Zhang Qianwen's voice was calm, but when he mentioned his master and Zhang Wenfei, it trembled slightly. I sighed. Zhang Qianwen's advancement to the heavenly master realm had a great impact on the Mount Wen's inheritance. It was just the beginning, but he had already taken back an inherited magical weapon. Although he was injured, it was a good thing. I was about to return the mysterious Yin ruler to him, but at that moment, Zhang Qianwen suddenly turned around and looked at me. "Zhou, what do you think of this treasure?" I was confused by Zhang Qianwen's question. Although I didn't know much about the Mount Wen's history, since he said that the mysterious Yin ruler wasn't inferior to the yin-yang yama brush, it was naturally an excellent treasure. Thus, I nodded. After getting my answer, Zhang Qianwen nodded and said, "That's good. I'll give this mysterious Yin ruler to you." "Give it to me?" I just took back an inherited treasure, and now I'm giving it to someone else? I was puzzled and subconsciously shook my head to refuse. Mount Wen probably doesn't have many inherited magical weapons now. I've already taken the yin-yang yama brush. How can I take the mysterious Yin ruler? Chapter 674. Zhang Qianwen's words made me feel upset. Zhang Wenfei and I were close friends. In my eyes, Zhang Qianwen had always been a big brother. Ever since we met, he had always been by my side, saving me many times and helping me a lot. After Zhang Wenfei's accident, Zhang Qianwen took care of me as if I was Zhang Wenfei. But as time passed, especially after little Wang Li's accident, Zhang Kanwen's energy was almost completely tied up here. As for me, my cultivation kept increasing under various opportunities. In the end, I caught up to Zhang Kanwen and even far surpassed him. My cultivation had changed, but my relationship with Zhang Kanwen hadn't. In his eyes, I was still the little brother that needed to be taken care of. But he could no longer use his own cultivation to help me, and could only try his best to do something for me through other methods. I looked at Zhang Kanwen and didn't know what to say. I just nodded and put away the mystic ruler. Fatty had found out the 8 words. Encountering Yang brings danger. Seeking Yin brings protection. I knew that it couldn't be such a coincidence that Zhang Kanwen had found the mystic Yin ruler. But Zhang Kanwen's thoughts gave me great encouragement, and I was no longer so worried about the Zhuelu trip. 2 days passed in the blink of an eye. In the last 2 days of preparation, Fatty continued to cultivate the lustful hand seal and removed the heavenly Tao seal in his body. Finally, before we left, he removed 60% of the seal on his cultivation. It was enough to surpass his cultivation when he was in the glorious knowledge realm. This made him extremely excited. As for me, I used these 2 days to refine the mystic Yin ruler that Zhang Kanwen had given me. On the morning of the 3rd day, I brought Fatty to Baoan International Airport with Wang Kun and Zhang Kanwen. We boarded the plane to Hebei. Before boarding the plane, Zhang Kanwen hugged Fatty and me. He didn't say anything, but this simple farewell made me, who was used to seeing farewells, feel sad. Fatty patted Zhang Kanwen's back and struggled out of his arms. He laughed and said, "All right, old Zhang, don't make it look like we're going to die. After 3rd baby and I take care of Lu Jinyang, we'll come back and have a good drink." With Fatty's interruption, Zhang Kanwen's expression relaxed a little. He forced a smile and nodded. "All right, I'll wait for you guys in the store. Go early and come back early." After hugging the Fatty, Zhang Kanwen's gaze fell on me again. He didn't say anything and just extended his hand to pat my shoulder. Although Wang Kun didn't know why Fatty and I were here, looking at Zhang Kanwen's expression, he knew that our trip wouldn't be easy. He had always regarded me as a deity, especially after saving little Zhang Kanwen so many times. He worshipped me blindly. Now, looking at Zhang Kanwen's appearance, he couldn't help but worry. He looked at the Fatty and me, his eyes turning red. I patted his shoulder and smiled. "What are you doing? We'll be back soon. We haven't gotten rid of that thing on Wang Li yet. When Fatty and I come back from Hebei, we'll completely solve little Wang Li's problem." After getting my promise, Wang Kun's expression became much better, and he repeatedly said, "Okay." At that moment, the radio announced that we were about to board the plane. We said goodbye again and entered the security checkpoint. Although it was a long way from Shenzhen to Hebei, it only took a few hours on the plane. After arriving at the Hebei Zhengding International Airport, Fatty and I decided to take a taxi to Tower Village. However, after looking for a few taxi drivers, they all said that they didn't know the place. Fatty and I could only settle for the next best option. We took a taxi to Zhuelu County. Only after we arrived at Zhuelu County did we find a taxi that could take us to Tower Village. We had been to Shandong's Jianzhu Mound before, but compared to that place, Zhuelu's Qiyu culture was much richer. On the way to Tower Village, the driver kept introducing Qiyu to me and the Fatty. According to them, Qiyu didn't look like the demon king or the god of war that we knew him to be. Instead, he looked more like a wise leader of a tribe. They even called him, along with Emperor Yin and Emperor Huang, the ancestors of China. Their words were full of admiration. With my understanding of ancient myths and legends, it wasn't a problem for me to say that. That's why I sat in the back seat and listened. Sometimes, I would say a few words to the driver. China's culture had a long history. However, with the passage of time, some ancient myths and legends had disappeared in the long river of history and were unknown to the people of today. An ordinary driver here could tell us all about Qiyu's deeds. From this, it could be seen that the local government had done a good job in protecting and spreading the local culture. After chatting for a while, the driver suddenly changed the topic and said to us, "You two look like cultured people. Why did you come to Tower Village? Are you here to pay respect to Qiyu? If that's the case, you didn't come at the right time. I suggest you come here every year during the Qingming festival. During that time, many people come here, including foreigners. It's very lively here. I smiled and shook my head. No, we just came here to have fun. If we can pay our respects to Chiyu, it'll be even better. After hearing that we weren't here for Chiyu, the driver's enthusiasm faded a little. He nodded and said, "Just have fun? That's good. It's the right time to come here. During this season, the scenery here is very good." A few days ago, many Taoist priests came to Mount Longhu in Jiangxi. They gathered at the Three Pure Temple. They said that they were going to hold a ritual. It's very lively. You didn't make a mistake coming here to have fun. Many Taoist priests came to Mount Longhu. From a relationship between Mount Longhu and Lu Jinyang, it wasn't strange that the cow noses of Mount Longhu had come here. However, why did they make such a big fuss and hold a ritual? Even an ordinary person like the driver had heard about it. I guess they were plotting something. After pondering for a while, I thought of Chiyo's tomb. Could it be that those cow noses also got the news and wanted to go to Chiyo's tomb? If that was the case, this trip to Zhilu would have more variables. Mount Longhu had always been a tall tree that attracted the wind. If they made a move, countless eyes in the metaphysics world would be watching them. Who knew if they would attract more people? The situation was getting more complicated. I couldn't help but frown. After pondering for a long time, I didn't have enough information. I couldn't figure out the situation, so I had to put this matter aside for now. I lifted my head and looked out the window. It was already late. Lu Jinyang had told me that the time was today. In theory, as long as it wasn't past midnight, it would be today. However, it wasn't good to delay it too much. I urged the driver, "How long until we reach Pagoda Village?" The driver didn't turn his head and said, "Young man, why are you in such a hurry? It should be around half an hour. Anyway, if you're in a hurry, I'll drive faster." Although the other party was Lu Jinyang, it wasn't good to break a promise. I agreed with him. Seeing that I agreed, the driver stepped on the gas, and the car sped up. He pushed me and the fatty to the back of the seat. The driver had good driving skills. Even though the car was driving at full speed, it was still very stable. Around 10 minutes later, we arrived at our destination. After we got out of the car, the driver asked for a long time about our return time. He said that he would pick us up at that time. Although we had a good chat, I didn't know the return time, so I tactfully declined. After watching the driver leave, the fatty lifted his head to look at the village in front of us. He asked me, "Third baby, where are we going now?" I looked at the fatty. This was a problem. Lu Jinyang's message only told us to meet at Pagoda Village today. He didn't tell us where we were going. Previously, when we were in Zhilu County, I had used a sound-transmitting talisman to ask Lu Jinyang about the situation. However, he didn't reply even after a long time. The function of a sound-transmitting talisman wasn't much different from a text message on a cell phone. After I sent the message, Lu Jinyang would receive it immediately. However, Lu Jinyang hadn't replied, even after so much time had passed. Combined with what the driver had said about Mount Longhu, I couldn't help but think that Lu Jinyang had encountered some trouble. It wasn't a bad thing for me if Lu Jinyang was in trouble. However, since the situation was unclear, I had to wait and see. Chapter 675. The driver took us as far as the entrance of Tower Village. We had to walk a long way to enter the village. He led the fatty forward and finally entered Tower Village. But after walking a little further, I stopped. There was definitely something wrong with this Tower Village. I am a metaphysician, so I am very sensitive to geomancy and geomorphology. No matter where I go, I will subconsciously look at things from the perspective of metaphysics. When I see a mountain, I look at the mountain. When I see a grave, I look at the grave. It has long been a habit. Although in recent years, with the gradual increase of my cultivation, the opportunities for me to look at geomancy have decreased a lot. However, I haven't abandoned this habit, and it has continued. In the study of feng shui, there were generally 4 major ominous positions: fate position, 5 ghost position, 6 evils position, and disaster position. In these 4 locations, no matter if one built a house in the living or buried people to build a house in the dead, there wouldn't be any good results. If it was light, it would cause constant bumps in life. If it was heavy, it would immediately attract disaster, leading to the destruction of the family. The fatal position was the position where the Alcade star would fly. Among the 5 elements, the destruction army belonged to the metal element. Its aura was reserved, but it itself had the intent of creation. It possessed extremely strong destructive power and self-destructive power. The 5 ghost positions were where the Lianjin star was flying towards. The Lianjin star's 5 elements were of the fire attribute, so the 5 ghost positions were extremely ferocious and chaotic. The positions countered each other, and disasters followed the positions. Although they were ranked after the fatal position, the degree of ferociousness was almost the same. People in the 5 ghost positions tend to be short-tempered and have a hard time getting along with others. Even friends and family often have conflicts and quarrels. The 3rd position, the 6 evil spirits, was the position where the Wenxiu star flew, which was more elegant and noble. However, Wenxiu belonged to water, and the flow of the qi field was messy. This position was good for children, but not for adults. It was especially bad for relationships, marriage, and career. If there was 6 evil qi in the house, it would make people listless, depressed, unable to think things through, and often make low-level mistakes. At the same time, it was easy to provoke gossip and sleep problems. The last position was where Lu Xuanxing was flying towards. The 5 elements of the lucent star belonged to Yin Earth, and its qi was heavy and stagnant. The aura in this area could easily disturb one's state of mind, causing one to become depressed and lack the spirit to strive and forge ahead. Being constantly bothered by trivial matters would lead to tiredness. The impact on one's fortune was minor, but the greatest harm was on one's mental health. I haven't been in the world of metaphysics for a long time, but I've seen a lot over the years. I've seen a few of the legendary 4 evils on and off. However, this is the first time I've seen a place like Pagoda Village that has all 4 vicious beasts. Just take the leading position as an example. Although this position was dangerous, it wasn't like there was no way to break it. If it was used well, one could even forge ahead and turn the danger into a blessing. To be more specific, it was to use metal as the spirit and reverse yin and yang. Although it was more troublesome, after the reversal, one could obtain the power to break through the army and turn it into an auspicious position. But this way, the god of gold would increase the ominous qi of the other 3 positions. By the same logic, the other 3 inauspicious positions also had their own ways of resolving them. However, without exception, resolving one inauspicious position would affect the other 3 and cause them to become even more vicious. Each of the 4 inauspicious positions was a single entity, but they were all interconnected. Pulling a single hair on one part would affect the entire body. There was no way to resolve it. Strictly speaking, these 4 inauspicious positions weren't unheard of in the world of metaphysics, but they were extremely rare. They were usually located in unfrequented wilderness and didn't affect people much. Naturally, there was no need to resolve them. This was similar to how human civilization mostly originated from the riverside. Humans would choose a place that was suitable for their survival. It was natural selection. For example, the vast sea desert, the treacherous mountains, and other places where life was forbidden. Naturally, no one would deliberately seek trouble there. However, this pagoda village was different. Not only was it located in the center of the 4 inauspicious positions, but it also had a flourishing population. It had even formed a village. I couldn't understand this. I kept thinking about it, but I couldn't figure out the reason behind it. Since I had so many questions in my head, my footsteps slowed down and my face became more solemn. The fat man seemed to have noticed my change. Not long after we entered the village, he turned around and asked me curiously, "Third baby, what's wrong?" I shook my head and frowned. I told the fatty about the geomancy I had seen. Although the fatty was also a metaphysician, he didn't know much about geomancy. After listening to me, he gawked. After a long time, he said, "Didn't you say that Lu Jinyang called us here to go to the Chiyo's skull mound? Is it possible that the Chiyo's skull mound is here and has such a strange geomancy?" The reason he mentioned was quite possible. I had been guessing for a long time, but it was the only reason I could think of. However, it didn't make sense. I couldn't explain why this place had a flourishing population. Seeing that I didn't say anything, the fatty continued. The driver said that many old Taoist priests from Mount Longhu came here. Do you think it's possible that they came here because of the strange geomancy of this village? I shook my head. Although the people from Mount Longhu also dealt with geomancy, they weren't kind people who would come here to solve people's problems. There were only two reasons why they had come here. One was to chase after Lu Jinyang and come here with him, and the other was that they had obtained information about the Chiyo's skull mound and wanted to get a share of the loot. However, speaking of Mount Longhu, I became more vigilant. After all, they and I were mortal enemies. If we accidentally bumped into each other, it would be a fight to the death. Before Lu Jinyang showed up and the situation was unclear, I didn't want to cause more trouble. As for Lu Jinyang, I didn't need to worry too much. He had asked me to come here because he needed my help. Before that, he wouldn't attack me. There was no doubt about it. Thinking about this, I couldn't help but laugh. The relationship between me, Lu Jinyang, and Mount Longhu was like the four ominous characters in Tower Village. Between us, there were grudges and grudges. Pulling one hair in one place could affect the whole group. On the surface, no matter if it was Lu Jinyang or Mount Longhu, they were much stronger than me and the fatty. Thus, after we had mysteriously joined them, we were faced with a fatal situation. However, after thinking about it, the more complicated the situation was, the more room there was for us to take advantage of. If we could make good use of the grudges between the three of us, it wouldn't be impossible for us to escape unscathed with the fatty. As we walked forward, we quickly reached a bustling area. Tower Village had the cultural scenery of Chiyo's tomb. Naturally, it was a place that the people in charge focused on developing. In recent years, Zhulu County had tried to turn Tower Village into an ecotourism base. They had invested a lot of money and formulated many generous policies. With this kind of support, Tower Village attracted a lot of foreign businessmen and began to develop the tourism industry. However, it was strange that after so many years, Tower Village hadn't developed at all. It hadn't achieved the desired effect. Some people said that it was because of Chiyo's vicious soul that intimidated the people who came here, making it hard for them to feel at ease. The tourists who came here always felt uncomfortable and wanted to leave after a few days. The development of the tourism industry had also suffered a serious setback. When I had looked up information before coming here, I had more or less agreed with this theory. After all, Chiyu was one of the ancestors of humanity. His spirit and had existed for thousands of years. It was completely possible for it to have a small impact on the burial ground. However, after coming here and identifying the positions of the four ominous characters, I didn't think so anymore. It didn't matter if Chiyu had the time to care about the tourists. Just the position of the four ominous characters was enough to make them suffer. It was normal that this place couldn't develop. It would be strange if it did. Of course, although the development of the tourism industry wasn't that great, it was still flourishing. This place didn't lack leisure villas. Not long after the fatty and I walked into the village, we saw a few well-maintained buildings. Cultivators were adaptable to their circumstances. We didn't have too many requirements for the accommodations. After looking in a nice leisure villa, I brought the fatty in and booked a room to stay the night. After a long day of traveling, the two of us were tired. After entering the room, the fatty lay on the bed. He didn't want to go out to eat, so he called the front desk to order some food. However, before the food arrived, he had already fallen asleep on the bed. Chapter 676. The driver who had brought us to the village didn't lie. Tower Village didn't have any interesting places. The hotel's guidebook only had a few pages with a few scenic spots. Among them, there were only 3 that interested me. One was Zen Master Ju's spiritual pagoda, the other was Mount Tai's Holy Mother Temple, and the last one was our destination, the Southern Chiyu Tomb. According to historical records and legends, the Yellow Emperor fought Chiyu at Zhulu. Chiyu was killed, and his head was buried in 2 places. Part of his body was hidden here. Since this place was south of Chiyo's battlefield, it was called the Southern Chiyu Tomb. In the guidebook, there was only a short description of the Chiyu Tomb. It was very simple and crude. It was strange compared to the Chiyu culture I had experienced when I arrived at Julu County. I didn't know if it was deliberately hiding something. After reading for a while, I threw the guidebook aside and started to plan my next move. The reason I had agreed to go to Julu with Lu Jinyang was that he had the Fatty's Monster Refining Gourd in the second volume of the Death Scripture. After I had entered the Heavenly Master Realm, I lacked cultivation techniques. That was why the second volume of the Death Scripture was very important to me. Lu Jinyang hadn't appeared yet, but regardless of whether he appeared or not, I had to go to the Chiyu Tomb. As I thought about these things, I walked to the window and glanced outside. I happened to see Zen Master Ju's pagoda facing Pagoda Village. I hadn't read the guidebook carefully, but I didn't expect that the spiritual pagoda would be so close to my villa. At first glance, Zen Master Ju's spiritual pagoda wasn't tall. However, it looked really tall and imposing as it stood on the opposite slope. Just as I was examining the spiritual pagoda, there was a sudden knock on the door. I lifted my head to look at the clock on the wall and frowned. Only 5 minutes had passed since the fatty had ordered the food. How could this hotel be so efficient? How would they prepare our food so quickly? Before I could figure it out, a woman's voice came from outside the room. "Are you Mr. Joey?" Hearing that, my heart tightened. Naturally, I didn't know anyone in Tower Village. The only people I knew were Lu Jinyang and those cow noses from Mount Longhu. Who was this woman outside? She actually knew my name. With doubts in my heart, I was about to open the door when the female voice passed through the wooden door and into the room. "Mr. Zhou, please don't misunderstand. I don't have any ill intentions. I just want to talk to you alone. Before you enter the room, I cast a spell on Mr. Lin Hu. I believe he is already asleep. Please open the door. I will come in and help Mr. Lin Hu remove the spell." Hearing this, I stopped in my tracks and furrowed my brows. This person actually cast a spell on Fatty. Fatty now had the cultivation of a heavenly adept. Although he could not unleash the full strength of a heavenly adept due to the heavenly Tao's seal, his strength was definitely not ordinary. How could he fall for someone else's trick so easily? What was even more frightening was that I had been with Fatty the entire time. We hadn't been separated for even a moment. This meant that when the enemy had attacked Fatty, I had been right next to him, but I hadn't noticed. This woman was able to attack Fatty right under my nose, so her cultivation was at least at the Yang God realm. I became even more suspicious, but I temporarily suppressed the anger in my heart. I used my insight power to observe Fatty. He was in a deep sleep, and the corners of his mouth were hooked into a smile. He didn't seem to be in any serious trouble. Only then did I relax. The woman outside the room seemed to be a little anxious. Seeing that I still didn't move, she continued, "Mr. Zhou, if you don't believe me, I will teach you the method to break this spell. When Mr. Lin Hu wakes up, please open the door." Hearing what she said, I was about to open the door, but I stopped again. With the cultivation that she had revealed, a small, ordinary door naturally wouldn't be able to trap her. However, she didn't come in without permission. Instead, she talked to me first. Just this attitude alone proved that the other party didn't have strong hostility towards me. However, I felt very uncomfortable that she had secretly attacked Fatty. Plus, I was a little worried. Hearing her suggestion, I nodded and agreed. Thus, I replied through the door, "Then, please teach me the method to break the spell. When my brother wakes up, I will open the door to welcome you." After getting my promise, the woman outside the room immediately replied, "I will teach you the method to break the nightmare spell. Mister, please listen carefully." Then, she whispered the method to break the spell in detail. The Heavenly Master Realm had a photographic memory. After listening to her, I memorized it. I didn't have the time to marvel at the magic of the spell and started to deduce it in my heart. Until now, I still wasn't sure if this woman was a friend or foe. I didn't dare to casually use the spell that she had taught me on Fatty. After I carefully deduced it several times, although I hadn't completely understood it, I could roughly confirm that the spell wouldn't cause any harm. Then, I walked to Fatty's side and tried to use the spell on Fatty's body. Although the woman's method of contacting us was a little extreme, she didn't lie to me. After I used the method on Fatty, Fatty immediately sat up on the bed. He seemed to have heard some noises outside the room. With a sleepy face, he asked me, "Third baby, did our food arrive?" Seeing his appearance, I was angry and amused. This fellow didn't even notice that someone had done something to him. He still remembered the food that he had ordered before going to bed. Before I could say anything, the woman's voice came from outside the door again. "Mr. Zhou, Mr. Lin who has woken up. Can you open the door now?" When Fatty heard the voice, he thought that it was the delivery man. He cheerfully got up and opened the door. However, as soon as he sat up, he seemed to realize that something was wrong. He stopped and looked at me suspiciously. I didn't have time to explain to him. I directly walked over and opened the door. Although I didn't like the way the other party had contacted me, I didn't refuse since we had an appointment. After the door opened, I looked up and saw a woman standing outside. She looked to be around 20 years old, even younger than me and the Fatty. Although she was wearing modern clothes, her long hair was tied into a simple bun at the back of her head. Her entire attire looked a little weird, but when matched with her gentle and beautiful face, it looked very harmonious. Seeing that she was alone outside the door, I relaxed a little. I stepped back and said, "Please come in." The woman didn't stand on ceremony. She smiled at me and bowed to greet me. Then she walked in. After entering the room, she looked around and found Fatty. She bowed to him and said apologetically, "I'm Wu Yu. I'm the owner of Mount Tai's Holy Mother Temple. I'm not a manservant who came to deliver food." To enter the room, I used the nightmare spell on Mr. Lin. "Please forgive me if I have offended you." Hearing her, Fatty opened his eyes wide. His face was bewildered. It was obvious that he didn't know what had happened. From her words, I managed to glean a few key pieces of information. Wu Yu, the owner of Mount Tai's Holy Mother Temple? I was sure that I didn't know this woman with a strange name. I was also sure that I had never had anything to do with this Mount Tai's Holy Mother Temple. Why did she suddenly come here to see me? I carefully recalled the travel guide I had just read. It had a lot of information about Mount Tai's Holy Mother Temple. It said that it had a long history and that before it was built, there was an anecdote. At that time, strange things happened in Tower Village. People often died of serious illnesses, and livestock died mysteriously. A traveling Taoist priest passed by the village. At first glance, he knew that this place was extremely dangerous. If he wanted to solve the problem, he had to build a temple halfway up the mountain to solve the problem. Many strange things had frightened the villagers. When they heard that there was a way to solve the problem, they asked the owner of the house to contribute money and the owner of the house to build the Mount Tai's Holy Mother Temple. After the temple was built, the strange things in the village disappeared. Later on, the traveling Taoist priest stayed in the temple. After 2 or 3 years, the villagers gradually got used to the temple and the Taoist priest. Whenever they encounter a problem, they would go to the temple to ask for help. The Taoist priest never refused them. At the beginning of the 4th year, a family in the village was in trouble. They went up the mountain to look for the Taoist priest. However, no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't find the Taoist priest. A few days later, people in the village spread a rumor that the Taoist priest had succeeded in his cultivation and ascended to the heavens. This rumor made the Mount Tai's Holy Mother Temple reach its peak. Chapter 677. Looking at Wu Yu in front of me, I quickly thought about the story of Mount Tai's Saint Mother Temple. First of all, I could confirm that the traveling Taoist priest wasn't a swindler. Although the knowledge of the 4 evils wasn't profound, it wasn't something that ordinary people could easily see through. That Taoist priest could see that Tower Village was built in a dangerous place, which meant that he was very knowledgeable. Moreover, it was possible that he had a cultivation base. However, the fact that he had used a temple to resolve the Tower Village's evils didn't seem so real. Since ancient times, there have been many cases of feng shui patterns being resolved by large-scale construction. This was not surprising. However, it was absolutely impossible to resolve the ominous feng shui of the fatal position, the 5 ghost position, the 6 evils position, and the scourge position with the coexistence of the 4 evils. Even the goddess temple of Mount Tai could not do it. Moreover, Mount Tai was far away in Shandong, while Tower Village was in Hebei. No matter how powerful Mount Tai's Saint Mother Temple was, it couldn't be that far away. From this point of view, this Mount Tai's Saint Mother Temple was fishy. Moreover, that traveling Taoist priest had traveled thousands of miles from Shandong to Hebei to build such a temple. He must have some ulterior motive. As for what he wanted, it wasn't hard to guess. I had traveled thousands of miles to this place for Southern Chiyo's tomb. That Taoist priest's goal was likely the same. The woman in front of me, called Wu Yu, claimed to be the master of Mount Tai's Saint Mother Temple. Her behavior was strange, so she must be related to that traveling Taoist priest. As I pondered, I bowed to Wu Yu and asked, "Miss, you came to visit me late at night and used this method. You must have something important to tell me. If there's anything I can help you with, please tell me." Wu Yu had gone through a lot of trouble to see me and the fatty. I wouldn't believe her if she said that she didn't want anything. However, I wasn't sure if she was a friend or a foe, so I had to be careful. Although her incubus spell didn't have much attack power, it could instantly destroy our combat power through some mysterious means. Compared to the main offensive spells, it was even more terrifying. Hearing my words, Wu Yu smiled. "Mr. Zhou, you're right. I came here this time to ask for your help. Here it comes." After being busy for a long time, she finally expressed her purpose. However, I still had some doubts in my heart and asked, "From a nightmare technique that lady just used, your cultivation is much higher than the both of us. Lady, you can't do it. So why are you asking me for help?" Wu Yu shook his head. "There are some things that I can't do, but you can easily do it, Mr. Zhou. What I want is for Mr. Zhou to leave this place." "Leave?" I rejected the proposal in my mind, almost without thinking. Our trip this time is firstly to fulfill our appointment with Lu Xingyang and ask him to return the demon refining gourd. Secondly, we're going to Chiyo's tomb to search for the 2nd volume of the Death Scripture. Not to mention these 2 items, I haven't even seen Lu Xingyang yet. How could I possibly leave? I lifted my head to look at Wu Yu. Her beautiful face seemed to be filled with the word uncompromising. After hesitating for a moment, I shook my head and replied, "Miss has a request, and I also have a request. I'm afraid that we won't be leaving for the time being." After hearing what I said, Wu Yu didn't seem surprised at all. She waved her hand and continued, "Misters, don't be in a hurry to reject me. Tower Village isn't as simple as you think. I know why you're here, but I still want to advise you not to have any ideas about those items." "Those items? Chiyo's inheritance or the 2nd volume of the Death Scripture?" I frowned. I wasn't sure how much information Wu Yu knew about me. Seeing that I didn't speak, Wu Yu didn't force me. Instead, she smiled and said, "I know that you definitely won't give up so easily. However, if Mr. Zhou is free, you can come to my temple first. I'll show you some things. After that, Mr. Zhou should know whether to stay or leave." His words were even stranger. Just as I was thinking about how to reject him, there was another knock on the door. "Hello, Mr. Lin. I'm here to deliver food. Can I trouble you to open the door?" The food that the fatty had ordered just now really arrived. When the fatty heard the voice, his eyes lit up. He was probably starving. Even I couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. Wu Yu's words were tactful, as though she was giving me and the fatty room to choose. However, in reality, she didn't give us any room to bargain. We hadn't gotten the demon refining gourd, the 2nd volume of the Death Scripture, and Lu Xingyang hadn't even appeared yet. Under such circumstances, we definitely wouldn't leave. However, I didn't want to offend the mysterious young god celestial master as soon as I arrived. Hence, I was conflicted and didn't know how to answer. The delivery man came at just the right time, temporarily dissolving the tense atmosphere in front of them. I pointed at the door and gestured for me to open the door. Wu Yu nodded, but then said, "I know that Mr. Zhou definitely won't leave so easily just by saying that. How about this? Mr. Zhou is tired from the journey, so you should rest tonight. Tomorrow morning, the 2 of you can come to my Mount Tai goddess temple and we'll discuss it. How about that?" She gave us some buffer time. I also needed time to think about it. Hearing that, I immediately nodded and agreed. Seeing me nod, Wu Yu smiled again. Then, she looked at us meaningfully and didn't say anything. Under the gaze of the fatty and I, her figure actually dissipated like mist. She really was a young god, celestial master. The ability to disappear in an instant was the ability that only a young god, celestial master could have. Teleportation. The fatty was bold. After seeing her leave, he immediately walked over to open the door and asked the delivery man to bring in the food. I stood on the spot and frowned, thinking about what the mysterious woman had just said. First of all, her cultivation was very high. Ordinary young god, celestial masters couldn't use teleportation. At the very least, they had to reach the middle stage of young god before they could start to practice it. If they wanted to truly master it, they would have to reach the late stage of young god. Since her cultivation was so high, she didn't attack us directly. Instead, she kept communicating with us. From this point, it could be seen that she didn't have much hostility towards us. But if that was the case, why did she persuade us to leave? This was just a small matter. More importantly, why did she know about the fatty and my identities? How much did she know about us? After thinking for a long time, my head was still a mess. When I turned my head, I saw that the fatty had already started eating. I walked over and sat down. I didn't have a mood to eat, so I asked the fatty, "Do you think we should go to Mount Tai Goddess Temple tomorrow morning?" The fatty chewed and said vaguely, "Let's go." Why wouldn't we go? In my opinion, that beautiful woman doesn't look like a bad person. Besides, no matter what the situation is, we have to understand it before we can make a judgment. This guy had always been without ideas, but what he said was right. I thought for a while and decided to go to the Holy Mother Temple on Mount Tai tomorrow morning. With Wu Yu's cultivation, she shouldn't have set up a trap and waited for us to walk into it. If she wanted to deal with us, she could have done it just now. There was no need to go through so much trouble. After making up my mind, I didn't think much about it. After eating with the fatty, we went to bed early. Pagoda Village was full of strange things. Of course, I didn't dare to sleep too soundly. However, the following night was peaceful. I didn't even hear the chirping of birds or insects. The next morning, after the fatty and I woke up, I tried to contact Lu Jinyang. Still, I didn't get a reply. I put the sound-transmitting talisman aside and ate breakfast in the hotel. I asked someone for directions to Mount Tai's St. Mother Temple. Then, I went to the temple. Last night, we had come in a hurry. When we reached the hotel, it was already dark, and we couldn't see the surroundings. Today, the sky was bright and beautiful. As soon as we got out of the villa, we saw Zen Master Ju's spiritual pagoda. Zen Master Ju's spiritual pagoda was located in the east of Pagoda Village. It was in the calamity position, one of the four evils. The calamity position was where Lu Tsuanxing would fly. Lu Tsuanxing belonged to the yin element, and its energy was heavy and sluggish. I carefully observed the surroundings. Soon after, I found that the spiritual pagoda had the effect of suppressing the earth energy. To a large extent, it could dissolve Lu Tsuanxing's ominous energy. However, it also increased the ominous energy in the fate, 5 ghost, and 6 evil positions. Chapter 678. The Mount Tai Saint Mother Temple worshipped the Saint Mother of Mount Tai. In the religion of northern China, the Saint Mother of Mount Tai had a high status. She was worshipped for more than 1,000 years. She was also known as the immortal fairy of Mount Tai, Blue Cloud Progenitor, or simply Blue Cloud Progenitor. Her temple was located on Mount Tai. Among the people, there was a saying, Northern Primordial Monarch, Southern Matriarch, or Northern Matriarch, Southern Matriarch. As for the goddess of Mount Tai Temple in Tower Village, from a geographical point of view, it was built on a hill to the west of the village. It faced Zen Master Ju's spiritual pagoda from afar. The two of them passed through Tower Village at the foot of the mountain and formed a complete straight line. Thus, the murderous energy suppressed by Zen Master Ju's spiritual pagoda could be transmitted to this place, where the Mount Tai Saint Mother Temple shared a part of it. Although the murderous energy in the position of calamity was strong, It was suppressed by Zen Master Ju's spiritual pagoda and divided by the Mount Tai, Saint Mother Temple. It wasn't difficult to erase it completely. However, after observing for a while, I found a problem. The Mount Tai Saint Mother Temple in front of me, which was built in an unknown era, was located in the most dangerous position of the 4 calamities in Tower Village. It was the fatal position. The fatal position was where the Army Destroyer Star flew to, hence its name. It had the meaning of ending one's life if one stayed there for a long time. Back in the day, people in Tower Village often fell seriously ill, and some even died mysteriously. A large part of the reason was because of the existence of this suicide spot. If it wasn't for the traveling Taoist who discovered it in time, none of those who fell seriously ill would have been able to escape the vicious aura of this suicide spot. Although the goddess temple of Mount Tai could suppress it, at the same time, there was another ferocious aura that spread to Zen Master Ju's pagoda. As time passed, the ferocious auras on both sides could not be completely eliminated. They could only gradually strengthen. After a simple observation, I followed the fatty and continued to walk forward. Although the Mount Tai Saint Mother Temple in front of us was built on a barren mountain, it had been worshipping people for years. The road leading to the mountain had long been paved by the villagers. The fat man and I followed the winding path up the mountain. Before we were halfway there, the fat man shouted that he was tired. He sat on the ground and rubbed his knees. No matter what, he had a rest. Cultivators had a much stronger body than ordinary people. However, before they reached the heavenly master realm, their bodies were still ordinary. Although the fatty had already condensed true essence, he had not yet completely removed the heavenly Tao seal. In addition to his fat body, it was normal for him to feel tired. Begrudgingly, I stopped and found a relatively flat rock by the roadside to sit down. As Fatty panted, he looked at the goddess of Mount Tai Temple on the mountainside and sighed. That little girl, Wu, looks quite beautiful. Why does she live so far away and even ask us to wake up so early to look for her? She definitely doesn't have any good intentions. I'm so tired. Looking at this fellow's lazy expression, I felt helpless and sighed. You've been growing more and more horizontally these past 2 years. When we remove the seal on your body, use your true essence to refine the fat on your body. After you lose weight, even if you don't use your cultivation, climbing mountains won't be so tiring. Hearing what I said, the fatty's face was full of disdain. He rolled his eyes at me and said snappily, I gained weight with my own abilities. Why should I lose weight? I was stunned and didn't know how to respond. I could only nod with a wry smile. All right. Money can't buy your happiness. As long as you're happy. The fatty chuckled and said, Third baby, look at me. I've been a fatty since I was a child. It would have been fine if I had lost weight, but I clearly didn't lose weight. I used my quintessential essence to refine myself and make myself thinner. Can I still be myself in the future? His words stunned me. After a moment of silence, I couldn't help but look at the fatty. This guy was always laughing and joking all day long. I didn't expect him to say such deep words occasionally. Thus, I didn't bring up the topic again. While the fatty was resting, I looked around. Due to the strange geomancy of Tower Village, my old habit of being a geomancer came back. I couldn't help but look around from a geomancy perspective. At this moment, the fatty and I were very close to the goddess of Mount Tai Temple. Thus, the aura of the fatal position was even more obvious. However, although the fatal position was a perilous place, as the saying goes, when things reach an extreme, they move in the opposite direction. In this perilous place, there were still a few places with relatively strong vitality. I looked around and quickly found 2 of them. The first one was Tower Village at the foot of the mountain. Besides Zen Master Ju's spiritual pagoda and the goddess of Mount Tai Temple, the reason why Tower Village had been able to survive in this perilous place for so many years was because of its location. The second one was the small forest not far from where the fatty and I were resting. In this fatal position, no matter if it was flowers, birds, or trees, they couldn't survive. If it weren't for the fact that it was in the right place, The vigorous trees wouldn't have been able to escape the fate of withering and dying. While I was pondering, a mountain breeze brushed past. The verdant grass in the small forest swayed with the wind, creating rustling sounds. I focused and saw a few figures hiding in the forest. My heart shivered. With my current cultivation base, my spirit sense could cover an area of 100 meters around me. If there were people hiding in the forest, why hadn't I sensed them? I didn't have much time to think. The figures in the forest seemed to have discovered me. They turned around and walked toward me and the fatty. However, it was very dark in the forest, and I was standing under the sun. I tried to look carefully, but I couldn't see the figure's face. At this moment, the fatty also noticed that something was wrong. He got up from the ground and jogged to my side. "What's wrong, third baby?" I didn't answer and pointed at the forest opposite us. At this moment, the figure in the forest had reached the edge of the forest. If he took another step, he would walk out of the forest. However, he seemed to be afraid of the outside world. He stopped and waved at us as if he wanted to call us over. The fatty followed my finger and saw the figure. He was surprised and asked, "Who is that? Third baby, do you know him?" I shook my head. "I don't know him, but from his expression, it seems he wants to call us over." "No, we can't." The fatty waved his hand. "This tower village is very strange. From what I can see, this fellow who suddenly appeared isn't a good person. We shouldn't meddle in other people's business. We should hurry to the temple." The fatty had always been a coward. When he saw this strange scene, he instinctively wanted to hide. I thought about it and felt that the fatty was right. It was better to avoid unnecessary trouble. There are many strange things happening in Tower Village, so I have no choice but to be cautious. Moreover, we had an appointment with Wu Yu this morning. Since the fatty was traveling slowly, it was already 10 o'clock in the morning. If we delayed it any longer, I was afraid that he would have finished his lunch. After thinking about this, I didn't care about the figure in the forest. I called the fatty and turned to leave. We continued to head toward the Mount Tai goddess temple. But at this moment, the figure in the shade of the tree became anxious. He picked up the stones on the ground and threw them at us one by one, as if he wanted to stop us from moving forward. This made me feel even weirder. I couldn't help but stop and turn around to exchange glances with the fatty. Before we could say anything, a stone whistled and hit the fat man's head. Instinctively, he staggered a step back. This time, the fatty was completely enraged. He glared at me and turned around. He said angrily, "You've gone too far. I don't want to talk to you. Do you think I'm easy to bully?" Then he rolled up his sleeves and ran under the tree. I want to pull him back, but he was too fast. I didn't manage to stop him, so I simply followed him. The fatty looked reckless, but he was actually very careful. Just now, he thought that it was better to avoid trouble because he didn't know the background of the figure in the forest. Just now, when he threw the stone, I felt the fluctuation of Tao energy. I roughly sensed it and found that the other's cultivation base was only at the ceiling acupoint realm. He was even at the dragon-seeking realm. He wasn't a threat to us. If I could feel it, the fatty could feel it too. That was why he didn't hesitate and rushed over. As for me, it wasn't entirely because I wanted to stop the fatty, but more because I was curious about him. At first, I thought that the figure in the forest was deliberately hiding here to harm us. That was why I left in a hurry. However, after seeing through his cultivation, he immediately ruled out this conjecture in his heart. Instead, he became doubtful. Chapter 679. The area under the tree's shade was a bit lower than our current location. Running downhill was much easier than running uphill. Not long after, we reached the tree's shade. After getting closer, I could see the figure in the tree's shade. It was a young Taoist priest with a Taoist crown on his head. He looked around 14 or 15 years old, and from his Taoist crown, he seemed to be from Mount Longhu. After seeing him clearly, I frowned. The fat man was enraged. He clenched his fists and angrily shouted at the young Taoist priest in front of him. "Damn it, why are you cow noses here again? Do you think I'm easy to bully?" Then, he clenched his fists and prepared to take action. In the past 2 years, I had a deep grudge with Mount Longhu. The fat man's situation was similar to mine. First, they had been kidnapped by those cow noses. Then, they had seen them attack Uncle Lin. Since we had arrived in time, those cow noses didn't get what they wanted. However, the grudge between them had deepened after a few encounters. I stretched my hand to pull the fat man. I felt strange. When the young Taoist priest saw me and the fat man, he didn't act as if he had seen an enemy. It seemed he didn't recognize us. When the fat man swung his fists and was about to attack, the young Taoist priest looked scared. He retreated a few steps and screamed, "Don't!" This action was different from the Taoist priests of Mount Longhu that we had seen before. The fat man was still angry, so he didn't realize that something was wrong. When I pulled him, he didn't stop. Instead, he dodged my hand and punched the young Taoist priest. However, his fist didn't come into contact with the little Taoist. Just as he came into contact with the shade of the tree, a screen of light rose up at the intersection of the shade and the sunlight. Not only did it block his fist, it even sent his body flying back a distance away. When I saw the fat man's attack, I was about to use my true energy to stop him. But now that he was pushed back, I quickly used my true energy to catch him midair. Unexpectedly, the restriction's rebound was too strong. After I caught the fat man, I felt a strong force pushing me back a few steps. After he steadied himself, the fatty jumped out of my arms. He looked at the young Taoist boy in front of him and lowered his voice. "Third baby, be careful. There's something strange about this forest. Just now, when I threw a punch, I received a direct counterattack. The force was far greater than what I used. I didn't need the fatty to remind me. At this moment, my heart became much more solemn. Just as I was about to study the seal, the little Taoist in the shade of the forest took a few steps forward. He looked at us and said in a low voice, "I told you not to hit me, but you didn't listen. Her Highness has set up a fatal seal in this forest. People from the outside can't enter, and people from the inside can't leave. If you try to break the seal with brute force, the Highness seal will return 10 times the force," the little Taoist said in a low voice. His face was full of dejection, and it seemed as if he had been wronged beyond measure. After listening to him, I understood that the young Taoist wasn't hiding here. He was trapped here. He had thrown the pebble at us on purpose. It seemed he had no choice but to do so. The pebble that hit the fatty's head was probably because we had stopped, and he hadn't stopped yet. That was why he had unintentionally hit us. However, after understanding it, I felt even more strange. What was so strange about this forest? Why was there such a seal? The little Taoist said that this seal was a fatal seal. Was it related to the fatal position here? Also, who was the Her Highness he mentioned? While I frowned and pondered, the fatty looked angry and started arguing with the little Taoist boy. "You little cow nose, you knew there was a seal here, but you didn't tell us on purpose. Did you want to make fun of me? I knew that the cow noses of your Dragon Tiger Mountain, from top to bottom, aren't good people." The little Taoist looked wronged. "I told you not to hit us, but you didn't listen. I think you're not a good person." Seeing that the two of them were about to quarrel again, I quickly extended my hand to stop the fatty. The people of Dragon Tiger Mountain naturally weren't good people, but the little Taoist boy in front of us was only at the dragon-seeking realm. Although we hated the people of Dragon Tiger Mountain, we didn't need to vent our anger on a child. After thinking for a while, I cupped my hands at the little Taoist boy and said, "This brother of mine has such a temper. Please forgive him, little Taoist. Little Taoist priest, why did you summon us over just now?" After hearing my apology, the little Taoist's complexion became slightly better. He looked at the fatty with fear before turning his head and saying to me, "You are walking up the mountain. Are you going to the Holy Mother Temple up there?" I nodded. "That's right." Hearing my answer, the little Taoist hurriedly waved his hand. "The cultivation of the two of you is definitely higher than mine, but the goddess in the Holy Mother Temple on the mountain is very powerful. Furthermore, she is temperamental and the most frightening. I called you just now to advise you not to go over to avoid being harmed." This was the second time he mentioned the so-called Her Highness. I couldn't help but ask, "Is this Her Highness that you mentioned?" The little Taoist seemed to have recalled something horrifying as his face turned pale. He took a deep breath and was silent for a while before replying. Actually, I don't know either. I heard it from Martial Uncle and the others. Martial Uncles? I glanced at the Taoist robe and Taoist crown that the little Taoist boy was wearing. Since he was from Dragon Tiger Mountain, it was impossible for him to come here alone. The martial uncles that he mentioned should be someone with a higher cultivation in Dragon Tiger Mountain. I didn't care about the people from Dragon Tiger Mountain for the time being and started thinking. Last night, when Wu came to find me, she said that she was the owner of Mount Tai's Holy Mother Temple. This little Taoist boy said that there was a Her Highness in the Holy Mother Temple. It sounded like he was talking about Wu Yu. However, from my interaction with Wu Yu, she always had a smile on her face. I couldn't relate her to the temperamental Her Highness that the little Taoist boy mentioned. After thinking for a while, I asked, "Have you seen that Her Highness? Do you know what she looks like?" The little Taoist boy looked behind him and shook his head. Only senior martial brothers and martial uncles have seen the Her Highness. However, they were knocked unconscious by the Her Highness and haven't woken up yet. Her Highness said that we didn't listen to her advice and didn't want to leave early. That's why she locked us in this fate-denying seal. She said that she would only let us out when we find our two missing martial uncles. Following the little Taoist's gaze, I looked behind him. Only then did I see that about 10 steps behind him, under a relatively thick tree trunk, there were quite a few adult men lying on the ground. The light was very dim, but due to the close distance, I could roughly see that they were all dressed as Taoist priests. Their cultivation bases were all different, and there seemed to be quite a number of them. Although the little Taoist boy didn't confirm the Her Highness identity, to be able to subdue so many Taoist priests of Mount Longhu at the same time, the so-called Her Highness cultivation level was definitely not low. Furthermore, Wu Yu's cultivation level was also at the Yang God realm. It was already very unusual for a Yang God celestial master to appear in a small place like Tower Village. The probability of two appearing at the same time was extremely small. Therefore, this so-called Her Highness was most likely Wu Yu. As for the temperamental that the little Taoist boy mentioned, I didn't really care. His perception is only based on his own position. In fact, I've seen many of Mount Longhu's actions. In my opinion, Wu Yu only injured these cow noses of Mount Longhu and locked them up here. He didn't take their lives. That's already very merciful. As I pondered, I asked the little Taoist boy, "Thank you, little Taoist, for telling me the truth. However, I still have a question. May I know how many people from little Taoist sect are on this trip? Also, why did you have a conflict with Her Highness?" The little Taoist boy was simple-minded and didn't suspect anything. Hearing my question, he told me everything he knew. There were a total of 33 of us on this trip. Originally, we had come to kill an evil person. However, in the temple on the mountain, we discovered traces left behind by the seniors of our sect. Therefore, we came to investigate. Later, the two martial uncles who were leading the group said that they had discovered some treasure in the mountain and that they had to bring it back to their sect. In the process of searching for the treasure, they alarmed the Her Highness in the temple. According to Senior Brother, the Her Highness temper was good at the beginning and she communicated with the martial uncles. Afterwards, I don't know what they said, but the Her Highness suddenly became angry. She alone injured all of us. Only two martial uncles escaped. The rest of us were all locked up here. Because my cultivation level was too low, I didn't enter the Her Highness front hall. That's why I wasn't injured. Chapter 680. The little Taoist priest's words were full of sincerity, so it was obvious that he wasn't trying to deceive us. He was merely advising us to leave out of pure goodwill. Looking at his childish face, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. While I was thinking about how to answer him, the fat guy on the side curled his lips and sneered. "What's going on in Mount Tai Goddess Temple? Why don't we just go and take a look? Don't listen to this little Taoist's alarmist talk. Besides, so what if that empress really exists? We're not like this bunch of good-looking but useless silver-looking spearheads from Mount Longhu. When the time comes, if she wants to cause trouble, we'll let her witness Lord Fatty's methods." After saying that, He lifted his foot and was about to go up the mountain. Although Fatty said it out of anger, his words were crude. Now, with Fatty's and my cultivation, even if we were to face Celestial Master Yangshun, we would still be able to protect ourselves. Even if this goddess temple of Mount Tai was really a dragon's pool and tiger's den, it would not be so scary that we would not be able to move forward. It's just that this young Taoist from Mount Longhu has good intentions, so there's no need for me to be fierce towards him. Thus, I smiled amiably and said, "Us two brothers came up the mountain with a prior appointment, so there's no reason for us to break it. Thank you for your kind advice, little Taoist. Let's part ways here." Then I cupped my hands in greeting and left the forest with the Fatty, heading up the mountain. The young Taoist was trapped alone in the forest and had to take care of the other heavily injured people. It was truly quite pitiful. However, there weren't many people as pure and kind as the young Taoist on Mount Longhu. In addition to the enmity between us, it was already good enough that I didn't hit him when he was down. There was absolutely no reason for me to help him. Seeing that we were determined to go up the mountain, the little Taoist still didn't give up. He shouted loudly behind us, "Benefactor, if you really want to go, there's no harm in waiting a little longer." Even though my two martial uncles were defeated by the Empress and escaped, they definitely won't leave the matter at that. They must have gone to get reinforcements. You can wait for my martial uncle to come back and then go up the mountain together. At that time, when that concubine harms people again, my martial uncle will be able to protect you. This little fellow really doesn't know how to persuade people. Not to mention the deep enmity between me and the people of Mount Longhu. Even if we didn't have any enmity, after hearing these words, I most likely wouldn't wait for his martial uncle to return. I had already decided to go up the mountain, so I didn't pay attention to the young Taoist. I took the Fatty with me and walked on a mountain path. Shortly after, I couldn't see the young Taoist anymore. But in my mind, I began to ponder over what he had said before. First of all, Mount Longhu had sent more than 30 people. Although their cultivations weren't too high, just from the number of people, it was the largest I had seen Mount Longhu mobilize in the past few years. The little Taoist said that they had only come here in the beginning to hunt down a heretical devil, which was probably Lu Jinyang. However, I felt that it wasn't the case. If it was just to capture Lu Jinyang, it would be useless to bring ordinary cultivators. It would be better to send a few strong cultivators to form a small team to capture him. That way, the chances of success would be higher. From this, it was possible that Mount Longhu had come here with a purpose. However, they hadn't even told their own people about this purpose. That was why the young Taoist didn't know about it. Moreover, the young Taoist said that they had found the aura of a senior from their sect in Mount Taishan's Saint Mother Temple. It was possible that the traveling Taoist mentioned in the legend was from Mount Longhu. From this point, besides dealing with Lu Jinyang, Mount Longhu had come here for two reasons. One was for Chiyo's tomb, and the other was to find this Taoist. Of course, the other possibility was that this Taoist was related to Chiyo's tomb, and the two things were connected. I didn't know if it was the case or not. Only when we arrived at Mount Taishan's Saint Mother Temple and met Wu Yu would we know. After thinking for half an hour, we finally reached the entrance of Mount Taishan's Saint Mother Temple. However, when we looked at the temple in front of us, the Fatty and I became doubtful. Whether it was the tourist brochure in the hotel at the foot of the mountain or Wu Yu's appearance last night, I had the impression that Mount Taishan's Saint Mother Temple was a place full of incense. However, the temple in front of us wasn't like that at all. On the surface, I could still vaguely see the grandeur and delicacy of the past. But now, all that was left was a pile of broken walls. The only place that still looked like a temple was the main hall, but compared to the temples I had seen before, it was still very old. The roof and courtyard were covered in weeds, and the side halls on both sides were half collapsed. It was impossible to tell what it looked like in the past. If it weren't for the signboard that read Mount Taishan's Saint Mother Temple, I would have suspected that I had come to the wrong place. After a long while, the Fatty sighed. This Mount Taishan's Saint Mother Temple is too simple, right? I nodded and suppressed my curiosity. I stopped paying attention to the dilapidated exterior and started to study the location of the temple from the perspective of feng shui. Although I had seen it before, I could only see it from afar. I could tell that it was a fatal spot, but I couldn't see the details. After studying it carefully, I discovered that although the suicide spots here are dangerous, they don't actually cover the entire area. There are still many places with vitality. If the traveling Taoist could see the dangerous feng shui of Tower Village, he could also see these minor details. However, after studying it for a long time, I found that this Mount Taishan Saint Mother Temple had many places that avoided the places with vitality. From this point of view, the Mount Taishan Saint Mother Temple had the ability to break the fatal spot. However, it wasn't the best choice. It couldn't fully display its power. While I was puzzled, the fatty had already started to walk in. I hurried to follow him. The fatty took the lead and headed straight for the main hall. After a short while, he arrived at the main hall. I followed behind him and walked in together with him. The main hall was still dilapidated, but compared to the dilapidated walls outside, it was like the difference between heaven and earth. After observing the place for a while, my eyes were attracted by a pile of cow bones in the corner of the wall. The pile of skulls was pale white, and they looked a little yellow. They were piled up in the corner of the wall, away from the light. They looked like countless evil ghosts, which would make people fall into a trance. I pulled myself together and looked at them. The cow skulls looked like they had been thrown here and piled up randomly. However, they had some kind of rule. It was similar to a formation, but it wasn't a formation. It was more like a rare, sacrificial altar. In the world of metaphysics, cows were magical animals. Their tears could ward off evil spirits and spirits. In some places in Tibet and Inner Mongolia, cows were used as totems to ward off evil spirits. However, this is the first time in my life that I've seen an altar made out of cow skull. I only vaguely remember seeing similar records in some Taoist classics, but I can't recall the specific details at the moment. While I was looking at the cow bones, the fatty walked around. When he returned, he said to me, "It's strange. There's a plaque that says Mount Taishan Saint Mother Temple, but why isn't there a statue? And that Wu Yu, didn't she say that she's the owner of this place? Why hasn't she appeared even though we've been here for so long?" My attention was completely focused on the cow bone altar. When I heard the fatty say that, I looked around. Just as he had said, there were no statues or incense burners here. Other than the pile of cow bones, the Mount Taishan's Saint Mother Temple was destitute. I really didn't know how the Taoist priests from Mount Longhu had found the traces of their seniors here. "You're a little late." While I was thinking, Wu Yu's voice suddenly came from outside the main hall. Hearing the voice, the fatty and I looked at each other and followed the voice. When I came out of the room, I looked around. I didn't see Wu Yu, but I saw a painting hanging on the wall on the left side of the door. I didn't know when this painting had been hung there. After being exposed to the sun and rain, it had become dilapidated like the side halls on both sides. The painting paper had also turned dark yellow, the same color as the surrounding walls. It looked very hidden. That was why we didn't notice it when we came here. When I walked over to take a look, I strangely found that there was a painting of a lady drawn in ink on this dilapidated painting. It wasn't damaged at all. What shocked me even more was that the lady in the painting was Wu Yu, whom I had met last night. Chapter 681. After Wu Yu appeared from the painting, her clothes became the same modern clothes as last night. However, the bun on her head was still the same as in the painting. With a faint smile on her gentle face, she walked toward us through the shadows under the eaves. Her footsteps were gentle, but her speed wasn't slow at all. In the blink of an eye, she arrived in front of me and the fatty. However, we were standing under the sun, and she didn't seem to like the sunlight. She frowned and didn't say anything. Then, she flashed into the main hall. After entering, her movements became gentle again, and she returned to her calmness from last night. From her gait, rather than saying that she was walking, it was more like she was floating. In addition, she was afraid of the sunlight, so I made a judgment in my heart. She was a ghost. Only ghosts had no weight. When they walked, It was as though they were floating in the air. They were extremely fast. It was the same for Tong Tong and the snake spirit, who were sleeping on my body. One of them was a ghost infant, while the other was a snake spirit soul. They had no weight, and they walked very fast. On the other hand, when a ghost cultivated to the heavenly master realm, they were no longer afraid of sunlight. However, out of instinct, they still hated sunlight. It was the same for Wu Yu, Tong Tong, and the snake spirit. This was also the reason why Wu Yu didn't want to stand under the sun and communicate with us. Instead, she flashed into the main hall. I called the fatty and returned to the main hall. I raised my head to look at Wu Yu. Her cultivation was profound. Although she was a ghost, her body was extremely solid. She was no different from an ordinary person. Even I couldn't see the difference. At this moment, Wu Yu stood in the main hall. She turned her head and looked around. She sighed and said, "This place used to be full of incense. Back then, when we escaped from Mount Longhu, we passed by the village at the foot of the mountain. We found something strange about this place, so we built a temple here and stayed. On one hand, we helped the villagers solve their doubts, and on the other, we explored the mysteries of this place. The villagers loved and respected us. At first, I was a little confused, but I soon got it. This Wu Yu is actually Taoist Yunio's Taoist companion. This Mount Tai Saint Mother Temple was built by them together. No wonder she said that she was the master of the goddess temple of Mount Tai." At this moment, Wu Yu's voice paused for a moment. He turned his head, and his gaze landed on the ox-bone altar in the corner. He continued, "The two of us stayed here for 2 years. The Taoist priest finally discovered the secret of this place. He told me to guard the temple here and not let anyone else, especially the people from Dragon Tiger Mountain, discover this place. After that, he went to that place, and this trip lasted for 100 years. After the Taoist priest left, I was left alone. During this time, the Taoist priest from Dragon Tiger Mountain passed by here several times. Although they didn't see my shadow, they still made me very afraid. If the Taoist priest was here, the two of us could join forces, and the Taoist priest of Mount Longhu wouldn't be our match. However, the Taoist priest didn't come out. I was afraid of being discovered by the people of Mount Longhu, so I entered the dreams of the villagers and had them destroy my temple. I tore down the sculptures and side halls. From then on, the incense sticks in this place withered, and people were rarely seen. That's how we had 100 years of peace." Wu Yu retracted his gaze and looked at the forest at the foot of the mountain. He continued, "But a month ago, the Taoist priest of Mount Longhu still found this place. Even though I cleaned up the traces I left behind hundreds of times, they still found some clues. Even the thing that my Taoist priest was looking for was found by them. They thought that after discovering these things, they would be able to force me to submit. However, things are different now. I've been protecting the Taoist priest for all these years, and I've already become a Yang God Celestial Master, so those people are no match for me. In the end, only a peak Celestial Master and a Yang God Celestial Master escaped with injuries. The others were trapped in the extinction seal by me." After saying so much in one breath, Wu Yu's voice finally stopped. I, on the other hand, felt a little dizzy as I thought about what she had said. According to her, she and her Taoist companion originally had a grudge against Mount Longhu. After they escaped, they lived here and built this temple. Later, the two of them found something in this place. The Taoist priest went to look for it, while she stayed here to wait. Recently, people from Mount Longhu came to find them. This story sounded reasonable, but I still had some questions in my heart. First of all, her cultivation base. Generally speaking, ghosts were slightly weaker than human celestial masters at the same realm. However, Wu Yu was only a Yang God Celestial Master, yet she was able to injure a Yang God Celestial Master and a peak Celestial Master of Mount Longhu. She also captured so many people with lower cultivation bases. This shocked me. Secondly, although this story sounded normal, it had nothing to do with me. Why did she know about me? Why did she go down the mountain to find me and ask me to leave this place? I still didn't have an answer. Finally, the Taoist priest mentioned in her story went to a place and didn't come out for 100 years. I came here at Lu Jinyang's invitation. Although Lu Jinyang didn't say it clearly, I guessed that he wanted to enter Chiyo's skull tomb. In that case, was the place that the Taoist priest went to Chiyo's skull tomb? There were many questions. I thought about it, and felt that I should first ask about the grudge between the couple and Mount Longhu. I raised my head to look at Wu Yu and asked her, "May I know what kind of grudge there is between Senior and Mount Longhu?" Wu Yu shook her head, her expression a little gloomy. She said, "It's not really a grudge. It's just a grudge. Back then, my Taoist priest was also a member of Mount Longhu and a Taoist of Mount Longhu. After we became Taoist companions, we were not accepted by Mount Longhu. That celestial master Zhang even forced my Taoist priest to kill me. Of course, the Taoist priest didn't kill me. Instead, he took me away from there and hid from Mount Longhu. In the end, with the help of the dangerous terrain, we escaped from Mount Longhu and settled down. The people of the righteous Tao of Mount Longhu were actually Taoist priests who didn't become monks. They could marry and eat meat. However, the Taoist of the righteous Tao was different. On Mount Longhu, other than Celestial Master Zhang, the person with the highest status was the Taoist. Unlike Celestial Master Zhang, who was hereditary and relied on bloodline inheritance, the Taoist was chosen from all the disciples with the best physique and established from a young age. Every time a Taoist died, another Taoist would be chosen. Therefore, the Taoist of Mount Longhu usually had an extremely high cultivation base. Under the circumstances that Celestial Master Zhang wouldn't easily appear, they almost represented the highest combat power of Mount Longhu. I never expected that the Taoist priest who built the Temple of Mount Tai would have such an identity. I opened my mouth, but I didn't know what to say. Love was the most complicated thing in the world. It was unbelievable that the Taoist priest, as a Taoist priest, would fall in love with a ghost like Wu Yu. After all, Mount Longhu had always taken the responsibility of slaying demons and devils. They were the most ruthless towards evil beings and wanted to get rid of them as soon as possible. Under such circumstances, Mount Longhu naturally couldn't tolerate a pair of ill-fated lovebirds like them. After listening to this story, I thought of Tao Wu. Our situation was quite similar to that of the couple. Fortunately, my identity wasn't like the Taoist priests. Otherwise, there would have been more twists and turns. And this story also answered my first question. The cultivation of the Taoist of Mount Longhu must be extraordinary. Since Wu Yu was his Taoist companion, he must have learned some things from him. With the body of a ghost, under the circumstances of the same cultivation, defeating a human cultivator was not too unbelievable. After pondering for a moment, I was about to ask other questions when Wu Yu spoke first. She looked at me with a faint smile and suddenly asked, "When the two of you went up the mountain, you must have seen the Taoist priests in the forest, right?" I nodded. I didn't understand why she suddenly mentioned this. Before I could figure it out, Wu Yu continued, "At first, the two of you didn't listen to my advice and insisted on staying here. I wanted to send the two of you into the suicide seal, but after thinking about it, I gave up on that idea." I frowned and looked up at her. I didn't know what she meant by that. Seeing that I didn't say anything, Wu Yu said with a smile, "Mr. Zhou, you have the Xin Yuan sword in your hand, and Brother Lin Hu is a formation genius. Although my suicide seal is powerful, it can't trap the two of you. If I let you in, it won't take long for the formation to be broken. When that time comes, the Taoist priests of Mount Longhu will benefit." My expression instantly changed. I was about to ask her how she knew about me, but before I could ask, she told me more about me. She even knew about the Xin Yuan sword. She also told me about the fatty's identity. Chapter 682. I even felt a little panicked. If she hadn't told me Wu Yue's identity, I wouldn't have known anything about her. But not only did she know my identity, but she also knew my secret. This feeling was as if someone had stripped me naked and thrown me on the street. It was extremely uncomfortable, and my heart was filled with a strong sense of unease. I took a deep breath and stared at Wu Yue. I asked coldly, You called us up the mountain just to tell us this? Who are you? How do you know my identity? However, Wu Yu still had a faint smile on his lips. With a calm expression, he replied, I told you last night that I called you guys up the mountain to show you something. After saying that, she suddenly changed her tone and pointed to the oxbone altar at the side. Just now, I saw Mr. Zhou staring at this altar. Could it be that you recognize it? Yes. This spirit was unpredictable. I didn't know what she meant. I was silent for a while and didn't answer her question. Instead, I asked, Is the thing you want us to see this altar? Wu Yue shook her head. Not really, but it's related to this altar. I frowned again. I did recognize this altar. Not only did I recognize it, but I also had a deep impression of it. Before I went to Chiyo's Shoulder Demon Tomb, I looked up a lot of information about Chiyu and saw this kind of altar in a Taoist book. After a moment of silence, I looked at Wu Yue and nodded. This altar is called the one-legged ox altar. It was originally used to worship the ancient god of war. I wonder which god did you build this altar here to worship? After getting my answer, Wu Yue's expression changed slightly. She repeated the words, one-legged ox altar. Finally, she looked enlightened. She turned to me and said, Oh, it's called the one-legged ox altar. Mr. Zhou is really knowledgeable. The gratitude on her face wasn't fake, but it was my turn to be puzzled. This temple was built by her and her husband, and the altar inside was naturally no exception. However, she built the one-legged ox altar, but she didn't even know its name. It was really strange. Seeming to see my confusion, Wu Yue explained with a smile, Mr. Zhou, you don't have to be surprised. This one-legged ox altar was built by my Taoist priest. I didn't participate in it. When the two of us came here, I was responsible for building the temple, while he went into the mountains behind. After the temple was completed, he came out of the mountain and built the altar. I didn't ask him any questions at the time. He said that after the altar was finished, he could use it to go to a certain place and obtain an ancient text. Later, after the altar was finished, he went inside. He was gone for 100 years. It was the second time Wu Yu had mentioned that the Taoist priest had gone somewhere. I frowned and couldn't help but ask, Where's that place you're talking about? Chiyo's tomb? Wu Yu was silent for a moment, but he shook his head. Chiyu, I don't know either. The Taoist priest didn't tell me, and I didn't ask. I didn't know what to make of her answer. After thinking for a while, I remembered that she had mentioned the word ancient book. If the place she mentioned was Chiyo's tomb, and she mentioned that the Taoist priest wanted to get an ancient book from there, then it was very likely that this ancient book was the second volume of the death scripture that Lao AI mentioned. Thinking of this, I panicked again. Up until now, only Lao AI and I knew about the death scripture. If my speculation was correct, the Taoist priest was the third person to know about it. The Xianyuan sword that Wu Yu mentioned earlier and the death scripture were the deepest secrets in my heart. Not only did it involve my cultivation, but it also involved Lao AI. I looked at Wu Yu, and my pupils constricted slightly. I opened my mouth, wanted to ask again, but I didn't know where to start. After a moment of silence, I found some problems. Just now, when Wu Yu mentioned my Xianyuan sword and the fatty's identity, she had a smile on her face, as though she had deliberately mentioned it to us. But this time, she had said it unintentionally, as though she hadn't realized it herself. If I were to rashly ask about it now, I might expose my own secret. So, after a moment of silence, I asked Wu Yu, Do you think that ancient book has a name? Wu Yu looked confused. I only heard the Taoist priest mention it. As for the name, I don't know either. From her expression, it was obvious that she didn't mean to hide it. I heaved a sigh of relief, but I still didn't dare to relax. Even if Wu Yu didn't know, the Taoist priest definitely knew something. Otherwise, he wouldn't have specifically said that he wanted to find that ancient book. Moreover, what Wu Yu said was something from 100 years ago. Although the Taoist priest didn't seem to be able to come out of that place, no one could be sure of the exact situation. Perhaps the Taoist priest had already obtained the second volume of the Death Scripture. Judging from the power of the first volume of the Death Scripture, if the Taoist priest had really obtained the second volume, his cultivation would have reached an unknown level. It would be almost impossible for me to obtain it again. Wu Yu sighed and said, All these years, I've been to that place many times, but there were no traces of the ancient book. Let's not talk about this first. Since Mr. Zhou knows about this altar, why don't you tell me the details? She was asking about the altar, but my mind was still on the so-called ancient book. I thought about her words. She was still waiting for the Taoist priest, which meant that the Taoist priest hadn't come out of that place. She said that she had been to that place many times, but couldn't find the ancient book. It seemed that the so-called ancient book had most likely not been found by the Taoist priest. Thinking about this, I felt a little more at ease. Then I told her about the altar. According to the records I had read, the Kuei ox was also known as the Thunder Beast. It was a strange beast with a kuei shaped like an ox, one leg, and no horns on its head. It was pale gray, and when it entered and exited the water, there would be wind and rain. It could produce the sound of thunder, and it was accompanied by the light of the sun and the moon. The earliest record of it was in the classic of Mountains and Seas, Great Desolate East. It was said that the East Sea had Billowing Waves Mountain. This mountain was about 7,000 li away from the coast. There was a beast on the mountain that looked like an ox. It was completely gray, had no horns, and only had one leg. Every time it appeared, there would be a storm. Its body shone with light like the sun and the moon, and its roar was as ear-splitting as thunder. This beast's name was Kuei. Later on, the Yellow Emperor obtained the Kuei ox and used its skin to make a drum. He also used the Thunder Beast's bones to make drumsticks. When he beat the drum, the sound of the drum could be heard from 500 li away, frightening the enemy soldiers and subduing the world. In the Battle of Zhulu, the Yellow Emperor was able to defeat Qiyu and bury Qiyu's body in a foreign land. This drum, made of the Kuei ox's skin, played an important role. Later on, Qiyu's tribe killed the ox and used its skull to create this kind of altar to worship Qiyu. After listening to me talk about the Kuei ox altar, Wu Yu pondered for a while. Then she smiled at us and said, "Mr. Zhou, you know the story of this altar, but you don't know its function. Mr. Zhou, please watch carefully. Wu Yu will show you the ability of this altar. In addition, the item that I invited you to here today is also in this altar." Then she urged her true essence. Her 10 fingers moved back and forth like butterflies flying through flowers. As the true essence flowed from her fingertips, beams of light appeared and scattered on the altar. I didn't know what she was doing, but I could guess that she was activating the Kuei ox altar. At this moment, I still wasn't sure if Wu Yu was an enemy or a friend. However, since she had talked to me for so long and hadn't made a move, she shouldn't be hostile for the time being. Thus, I remained silent and let her do whatever she wanted. About 15 minutes later, as the last beam of light from Wu Yu's fingertips dissipated, something strange happened in the room. On the Kuei ox altar, the ox skulls that had been piled together seemed to come to life and floated in the air. The empty eye sockets on the skulls suddenly emitted a white moonlight, and the mouth and nose spewed out a gray mist. In the blink of an eye, it filled the entire hall. The fatty, and I didn't know what the mist was. Our expressions changed, and we raised our hands to disperse it. At this moment, Wu Yu's voice rang in our ears. "Misters, you don't have to do this. The gray mist is harmless." Hearing her say that, I stopped moving. However, I was still careful and sealed my mouth and nose to prevent myself from inhaling the gray mist. At the same time, I signaled the fatty with my eyes. I didn't know if the fatty understood what I meant, but at this moment, the yellowed ox skulls suddenly swayed in the gray mist. The white moonlight in their eye sockets reached its peak and even separated from them. They were like bright eyeballs that gathered above our heads. At this moment, Wu Yu suddenly clasped her hands together. The light that had gathered expanded again, completely enveloping the three of us. Outside the white light, the yellowed ox skulls seemed to come to life. They opened their mouths and roared silently at the vast sun through the broken roof. Chapter 683. As soon as I realized that something was wrong with the surrounding environment, I activated the true essence in my body and vigilantly observed my surroundings. After cultivating for so many years, I had already developed this habit. After waiting for a while and seeing that there was no danger, I relaxed a little and lifted my eyes to look around. It was extremely dark here, and there seemed to be countless black gauze floating in the air, obscuring my vision. I couldn't even see the things in front of my feet clearly. I could only vaguely feel that I was standing in a pile of white stones. These stones were big and small, and they were all piled up chaotically. Most of them were bare, and only a few of them had some withered wormwood growing on them. The air was filled with a desolate aura, as if I was in the middle of a wilderness. I couldn't see clearly with my naked eyes, so I used my clear insight power to look around. The clear insight power didn't disappoint me. This time, the black gauze in front of my eyes finally disappeared, and my surroundings became much clearer. However, when I saw the white stones and wormwood, I couldn't help but feel a chill run down my spine. This wasn't a wilderness, but an ancient battlefield. Those white things weren't stones, but piles of weathered corpses and bones. These corpses, without exception, were all incomplete. Some were lying flat on the ground, with pale skulls and empty eye sockets. Some had rusted spears stuck in their bodies, but they didn't fall down. Instead, they grabbed the corpses of their enemies and knelt on the battlefield. There were also some corpses that were piled up in groups of 3 to 5. It was probably because the battle had progressed to the end and both sides were exhausted. Their weapons, spears, swords, and halberds had long been worn out to the point that they couldn't be used anymore. Thus, they had given up on their weapons and fought barehanded on the bloody battlefield. They had used their nails, teeth, and the strongest and most powerful parts of their bodies to fight against their opponents. I even saw a large pile of corpses not far from me, which had been piled up into a small hill. At the top of the hill was a corpse that was kneeling on the ground, biting the neck of another corpse. I didn't know how many years had passed, but the flesh and blood of that corpse had already turned into a pile of white bones. However, he still hadn't let go of his teeth, nor had he let go of his enemy. I looked around at the corpses in all sorts of postures. It was hard to imagine what kind of battle had taken place here. With the support of the power of insight, I could see very far away. However, when I looked around, all I could see was grayish-white bones as far as the eye could see. It was as though the entire land was piled up with corpses, and there was no end to it. I was puzzled. Wu Yu had said that I could reach a certain place through the altar in the goddess's temple. I had always thought that I would reach Chiyo's tomb. However, the ancient battlefield in front of me is even larger than Tower Village. This isn't Chiyo's tomb. It's a strange space that can't be seen from the outside world. A gust of wind blew past, and the war flags that had not been eroded by the passage of time fluttered in the wind on the decayed flagpoles. In this desolate environment, even the sound of the wind seemed to be sobbing, making people feel miserable just by hearing it. I looked up at the flagpole. Although the scarlet flag was broken, it was still fluttering slowly. I could vaguely see the image of a vigorous bull on it. In ancient times, when two armies faced off against each other, there would be war flags with the name of the army or the surname of the general. It was used to distinguish the two opposing sides, and it was also used to display military might. This method had been passed down since ancient times. However, during the desolate antiquity era, due to the productivity and embroidery skills of that time, there were no embroidery words or army numbers on the war flags. However, the ancient ancestors would draw their own tribe's totem on the war flags to display military might. The Chiyu totem was recorded in detail in the ancient clan records. Coincidentally, I had seen it before. According to historical records, among the ancient ancestors, the Juli tribe led by Chiyu had mainly used the totem of a bull and a totem of a bird. As I thought about this, I could roughly guess where I was. According to the annals of the 5 emperors, Chiyu rebelled and didn't need an emperor's decree. Hence, the Yellow Emperor sent troops to fight Chiyu in the wilderness of Zhuolu. This was obviously the battlefield of the Zhuolu War. If my guess was correct, although the Koei altar hadn't sent us to Chiyo's tomb, this place was clearly related to Chiyo's tomb. I couldn't figure out the specific connection for the time being, but I believe that after some exploration, I would be able to find some clues. Hence, I stopped thinking about other things and focused on the fatty and Wu Yue. Just now, when Wu Yue activated the altar, the white light that surged out covered the three of us. Hence, when I teleported here, the two of them should have arrived here as well. However, the teleportation process separated us. Wu Yue's cultivation base was profound, and the whole thing was under her control. After arriving here, there naturally wouldn't be any problems. I was worried about the fatty. He was timid to begin with. After seeing the surroundings, he would definitely be frightened. I didn't know where he was or if he was in danger. With that thought in mind, I took out the sound-transmitting talisman and prepared to contact the fatty. The sound-transmitting talisman had the effect of sending messages from 1,000 miles away. Fortunately, I had given the fatty a sound-transmitting talisman before coming here. Otherwise, I would have been at a loss in the face of such a situation. However, just as I took out the sound-transmitting talisman and didn't have time to use it, a gust of wind blew towards me. I frowned and immediately realized that the wind was a little strange. I didn't have time to contact the fatty and quickly put away the sound-transmitting talisman. Then the true essence in my body surged out. From the moment I arrived at this ancient battlefield until now, the howling of the wind in the surroundings had never stopped. However, even though the surrounding wind was cold, it didn't make me feel any danger, much less the distinct stench of blood that I could smell at the tip of my nose. This wind was extremely fast. Just as I put away the sound-transmitting talisman, it arrived in front of me. The originally unclear light obviously dimmed a little. I raised my head and faced the cold wind. I blurted out the incantation that I had prepared. Suppress. After entering the Heaven Master realm, the incantation had become my most commonly used technique. Regardless of whether it was during the Heavenly Grand Ritual or when I fought against enemies, I had used the incantation many times. Moreover, my cultivation was gradually approaching the late stages of the Heaven Master realm. Thus, the incantation's power was much stronger than before. As the strong wind brushed against my face, I felt a dense smell of blood. It was as though a fierce tiger that had just eaten a meal was opening its huge mouth towards my face. As the huge mouth was about to descend, the smell of blood that I breathed in became denser. However, the incantation's power was absolute. Just as I finished speaking, the incantation's power landed on the strong wind and suppressed it. The strong wind was suppressed by the incantation's power. Its momentum clearly slowed and it stopped in midair. I used my insight power to look over. I saw that the originally formless and colorless strong wind had suddenly revealed its form under the suppression of the incantation's power. In Soul, the main body of this strong wind, was an In Soul. From its appearance, this In Soul was an ancient warrior. He was over 8 feet tall, and his eyes were wide open. A piece of beast skin covered his body, revealing his arms and thighs. I could faintly see the bulging veins on them. He waved his battle axe and chopped down at me. Although he had an In Soul body, the battle axe was extremely solid. Looking at its power, even with my powerful physical body, I would be severely injured by this battle axe. Apart from the power of the battle axe, I also noticed that this In Soul was extremely strange. Since I had started cultivating, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that the number of In Souls I had seen was innumerable. Those with higher cultivations included Wu Yue, Tao Wu, and Tong Tong. As for those with lower cultivations, I had seen at least 100,000 in the In Soul Valley not far from the Fire God Temple. However, the In Soul in front of me was different from Wu Yue, Tong Tong, and the 100,000 In Souls I had seen before. In Souls were souls that had lost their heavenly souls. For example, the 100,000 In Souls in the In Soul Valley had lost their heavenly souls, and their consciousness was scattered. Their souls were weak, and they couldn't actively cultivate. At most, they could only become frightening ghosts. As for Tong Tong, after his physical body died, his heavenly soul remained. With his 3 souls intact, his consciousness was no different from that of an ordinary person. He was very suitable for cultivation. Hence, under my guidance, his cultivation could increase rapidly. The situation of the snake spirit was basically the same. As for Wiyue, although I wasn't very familiar with her from her cultivation, it was most likely the same. However, the Een soul in front of me was different from the two situations. This Een soul's heavenly soul was still there, but it didn't have a consciousness. Although it had a certain amount of power, it obviously wasn't cultivated. Instead, it had absorbed the cold Een energy that was drifting in the ancient battlefield. After a long period of accumulation, it gradually gained a certain amount of power. Chapter 684. I studied it for a while, but I couldn't see through its mysteries. I could only guess that it was a ghost of an ancestor who had died on this ancient battlefield. Due to some reason, the heavenly soul couldn't leave the body and stayed in the soul. That was how it formed this strange ghost. Although the situation was strange, I didn't have time to study it. My priority now was to find the fatty. I took out a burning sun talisman from my pocket and poured my true essence into it. Then I threw it at the ghost. The burning sun talisman was the most common yellow talisman. It was the lowest level of talismans. I could make it before I started searching for the dragon, so its power was just average. However, my cultivation base was close to the later stage of the seal realm. With my true essence, even the lowest level burning sun talisman could burst out with great power. On the other hand, although the ghost was fierce, it didn't have a high intellect. It didn't dodge and let the burning sun talisman hit its body. Under the urge of my true essence, the talisman exploded into a scorching fire dragon that enveloped the ghost and burned it into nothingness. It didn't even have a chance to scream. After dealing with the ghost, I put my hand into my pocket and took out the sound-transmitting talisman to contact the fatty. However, as soon as my finger touched the talisman, I felt a burst of heat. I was delighted. After I had made this talisman, I had only given it to the fatty and Zhang Canwen. The one who was contacting me this time was definitely the fatty. I hurried to take out the talisman and poured my true essence into it. Sure enough, it was the fatty who had sent me a message. "Third baby, where are you? Come and save me. Why are there so many ghosts here?" After reading the fatty's message, my face changed. The fatty was in trouble. He said that there were many ghosts. Did he encounter the same kind of ghosts I had just killed? I started to worry. Although these ghosts weren't weak, they didn't have any intellect. Their individual fighting capacity was very low. Even the fatty's cultivation base was enough to kill them. However, these kinds of ghosts without intellect would become terrifying when they reached a certain level. Since they didn't have intellect, once they started to attack, they wouldn't stop until they were dead. There was a limit to one's strength. If one exhausted all one's strength and still could not eliminate these Een souls, the only result would be being devoured by these Een souls. The fatty's description wasn't clear, so I couldn't guess his situation. I hurried to call him. "What's going on? How many souls are there?" However, after sending the message, I waited for a full minute, but the fatty didn't reply. With the fatty's current cultivation base, I didn't believe that he couldn't hold on for even a minute. There was only one reason why he didn't reply. He was currently being besieged by countless ghosts, and he couldn't free himself. I took a deep breath and looked around. However, the vast ancient battlefield seemed boundless. I didn't know where the fatty was at all. In a moment of desperation, I stomped on the ground and soared into the sky, trying to find the fatty's location. However, I didn't expect that, after flying for less than 5 meters, there would be a commotion in the air. On the boundless ancient battlefield, it was as if my action of flying into the air had startled something. In an instant, countless gusts of wind surged from the horizon, bringing with them black smoke. They covered the sky and covered the earth as they surged towards me. The momentum was so great that it even covered the originally dim light in the surroundings. I used the Danshin power to look at the strong gusts of wind coming from all directions. It was just as I had guessed. There was a screaming ghost in each gust of wind. Just like the one that had been burned, they all had heavenly souls, but they didn't have intellect. They were affected by the murderous aura of the ancient battlefield. Once they saw a living creature, they wouldn't stop until they were dead. Looking at the momentum around us, not only the fatty, but even I was shivering. I wasn't sure if I could resist them. How could the fatty, who had just reached the heavenly master realm and a portion of his cultivation was still sealed, resist them? I took a deep breath. Before the ghost could pounce on me, I hurriedly activated my true yuan to send a message to the fatty. I told him that I couldn't find him at the moment and that he shouldn't panic. He should hold on and create some commotion so that it would be easier for me to find him. After I sent the message and put away the sound transmitting talisman, the surrounding ghost army had already arrived in front of me. The distance between me and the ghosts at the forefront was less than 10 steps. With the speed of the ghosts, it would only take an instant for them to reach me. I wouldn't have enough time to escape. Of course, I didn't have any thoughts of escaping. I just stood at my original position and took out the armor-removing sword. From a scale of the army, it seemed that all the soldiers that had died on the battlefield had become ghosts. From this, it could be deduced that this was a completely sealed and mysterious place. The souls of the soldiers that had died that year couldn't dissipate and remained in their bodies. That was why these ghosts had heavenly souls but didn't have any consciousness. Facing such a large army of ghosts, I didn't have to destroy them. I had to protect myself and find the fatty to ensure his safety. If I were to rush forward and kill them, not only would I not be able to alleviate the danger that the fatty was facing, but I might also run in the wrong direction. If I couldn't defeat them, I might even lose my life. Time was of the essence. I didn't have much time to think. The ghost army at the forefront had already arrived in front of me and was about to pounce on me. At this critical moment, I couldn't care about anything else. I looked at the surging ghost army in front of me and waved my right hand. The armor-removing sword flew out. The moment I attacked, I used the emotionless sword that the hidden edge had taught me. The armor-removing sword was a natural magic tool that was extremely mysterious. Even though it was broken, its power was still extraordinary, especially under the activation of the hidden edge emotionless sword principle. With a swing of the sword, the souls within 3 meters in front of me were all minced, turned into gray mist, and dissipated in the surroundings. However, I didn't feel happy. Instead, my brows furrowed even deeper. As soon as I killed the ghost within 3 meters of me, the ghost army behind me immediately surged forward. When they arrived in front of me again, there was still an endless sea of ghosts. Compared to the whole ghost army, the ghosts that I had killed just now were like a drop in the ocean. The second wave of ghosts arrived. I could only swing my sword again. I didn't even have the time to think. I swung my sword dozens of times in a row. I didn't know how many ghosts I had killed, but the ghosts in front of me continued to surge forward. After a full quarter of an hour, the situation finally changed. However, it wasn't in my favor, but in a direction that was even more disadvantageous to me. I didn't know how many times I had used the armor-removing sword, but all the ghosts within 10 feet of me disappeared. Only one ghost survived the power of the emotionless sword. He didn't even receive much damage. He stood there, clad in armor and holding a spear. Whether it was his aura or power, he was much stronger than the ghost around him. It was obvious that this Een spirit was an existence similar to a general in the army of Een spirits. I didn't dare to let my guard down. I swung the armor-dismantling sword again. The emotional sword energy collided with the long spear in his hand. Then the long spear broke, and the emotional sword energy surged forward. Not only did it kill the general who had charged forward, but it also pierced through the army of ghosts behind him. It destroyed dozens of ghosts in a row before vanishing completely. The armor-removing sword's power was still trustworthy. I was slightly more spirited. I took the opportunity to look inside myself. After this period of fighting, I had used up half of my Zhen Yuan. If this continued, I would only be able to hold on for another 15 minutes before my Zhen Yuan was completely exhausted. I didn't even count the general souls in the ghost army, which were obviously much stronger. In fact, when I looked up, I could see 4 or 5 general souls in my line of sight. The spirits were like a rising tide. This time, they didn't give me much time. Soon, they swarmed over me again. I could only absorb the true dragon chi from the jade bracelet as I swung my sword. The armor-removing sword was still sharp, and the emotionless sword was still reliable. However, my arm was starting to go numb. Facing the endless ghost army, I felt like I was hitting water with a sword. If I cut the water with a sword, the water would continue to flow. There was no end to it. I couldn't go on like this. I had to think of a way. Chapter 685. The last time I summoned Tong Tong was in the Fire God Temple. At that time, she told me that her cultivation base was at the peak of the middle stage of the Seal Realm. She just needed one more step to break through to the late stage of the Seal Realm. When she came out, I took a closer look. I hadn't seen her for a month, and she had indeed reached the late stage. Tong Tong was happy to see me. She smiled sweetly and asked, "Why did you summon me?" I didn't have time to answer. A spirit suddenly attacked Tong Tong. It was also a spirit, but Tong Tong was a heavenly embryo, and she had the cultivation base of a seal heavenly master. Her power wasn't something these spirits could compare to. I didn't need to remind him. Tong Tong waved his right hand, and a bolt of lightning appeared, striking the spirit that was coming at us. Heavenly lightning was the nemesis of spirits. Even a heavenly embryo like Tong Tong didn't dare to resist the power of heavenly lightning, let alone these spirits that didn't have any intelligence. When the spirit encountered the heavenly lightning, it didn't have a chance to survive. In just a blink of an eye, it turned into ashes. The remaining power of the lightning bolt didn't stop. It swam and entered the army of spirits, destroying a large number of them. Finally, it disappeared. I took a quick glance and found that the number of souls killed by the lightning bolt was more than the number of souls I had killed by using the armor dismantling sword. In terms of power, Tong Tong wasn't as strong as me. However, everything had its counter. Using heavenly lightning to destroy spirits was the best choice. After Tong Tong had eliminated a large number of spirits, the surroundings quieted down. But then, a voice that sounded like a duck's quacking came from my back. "Handsome and great master, why did you summon me?" Although I was at a critical juncture in my cultivation just now, when I heard your call, I immediately stopped cultivating and immediately came out to see you. The spirit snake jumped down from my back. It seemed he had sensed Tong Tong's presence, so he immediately changed into a flattering manner. Listening to his quacking voice, I couldn't help but smile. The pressure on my body was relieved. The spirit snake had broken through to the heavenly master realm earlier than me and Tong Tong. Usually, he stayed in my body and used my blood to increase his cultivation base. Since he wanted to transform into a real dragon, I didn't call him out unless it was necessary. Looking at the time, I haven't seen him for a while. It was rare for this fellow to come out, so he was obviously more excited than Tong Tong. He didn't transform into his human form, but instead hovered around me and Tong Tong in his flood dragon form. I carefully looked at him. This fellow's body was much more solid than before. The scales on his body were no longer black, but rather dark gold. The signs of his dragon transformation were extremely obvious, especially the dragon horn on his forehead. When he had just transformed into a flood dragon, there was only a slight protrusion, but now it had grown into a horn that was 3 inches long. At first glance, it looked majestic, and it really did look like a dragon. However, this fellow couldn't stay cool for more than 3 seconds. After circling around us a few times, he saw the ghost army around us. In just a blink of an eye, he hid behind Tong Tong and me. With a frightened face, he used his tail to point around. His voice trembled as he asked, "What's going on? Why were there so many ghosts? Brat, don't tell me you've brought me to the netherworld." This fellow's words always made people angry. I couldn't help but slap his head. "If you want to go to Gehenna, you can do it yourself. Don't curse me and Tong Tong." The serpent spirit realized that he had made a slip of the tongue. He laughed, but his voice was still trembling. "Where are we?" At this moment, the ghosts around us surrounded us again. I swung my sword several times, and Tong Tong also threw a lightning bolt to clear the ghosts around us. After everything was done, I took a deep breath and told them the situation we were facing. Tong Tong was the most considerate. After listening to me, she smiled at me and said, Brother, don't worry. I'll call Little Snake. We'll deal with these ghosts together. Then, the girl turned to look at the serpent spirit. She smiled at him and asked, What do you think, Little Snake? The serpent spirit was the most timid one. Perhaps it was because he had died once, so he valued life and death a lot. After listening to Tong Tong, he turned to look at the huge ghost army. He wasn't even afraid of Tong Tong's threat. He shook his head like a rattle drum and shouted with his croaky voice, No, there's so many ghosts. Even if you beat me to death, I won't do it. It was the first time he had seen him resist. Tong Tong was bewildered and didn't know what to do. I couldn't help but laugh as I watched from the side. I said to the snake spirit, Little Snake, you're right. With so many spirits, no matter how powerful we are, we'll eventually be exhausted by them. At that time, we won't be their opponents. After listening to me, the serpent spirit's tears rolled down. He nodded at me and said, Little Master, you understand, Little Snake. It's not that I'm timid, but there are too many ghosts. I was floating in the air, but I couldn't see the end of the ghosts. We're not their opponents. If you ask me, how about this? We should take advantage of our current strength and kill our way out. What do you think? If possible, I'll be the vanguard. It was rare for him to be brave. After saying that, he patted his chest and prepared to rush out. I quickly pulled him back and said, Don't worry. I want to ask you, have you ever thought about what would happen if we were exhausted by these ghosts? The serpent spirit looked at me as if he was looking at a fool. These ghosts are so cruel. What will we do then? We'll have to go to the real underworld. After saying that, he seemed to have imagined what would happen. He shivered and added, Let's not talk nonsense. Let's run. I shook my head helplessly. What happened to your brain? They are ghosts, and you're also a ghost. It's obvious that these ghosts have found me. That's why they're coming here. They didn't notice you and Tong Tong. Didn't you notice? If we fight until the end, I'll be swallowed. You and Tong Tong are the same kind of ghosts. They won't attack you. After listening to me, the serpent spirit and Tong Tong were stunned. Then, they spoke at the same time. Tong Tong said anxiously, Brother, why don't we listen to the little snake and run away first? The serpent spirit was shocked. He said excitedly, Hey, why didn't I think of that? Run my ass. Just watch and see how I devour these Ean souls. I was speechless. Fortunately, the serpent spirit finally stopped running. I turned to comfort Tong Tong. Then, I asked them to help me resist the surrounding ghost attacks. I took out the sound-transmitting talisman and checked it. There was still no news from the fatty. Then, I sent him 2 more messages to ask about his current situation. After sending the messages, I waited for a few breaths. It was the same as before. The fatty didn't reply. I didn't hear the fatty's reply, so I furrowed my eyebrows and pondered for a while. I tried to fly into the air to check again. However, after I had just leaped a few meters into the air, I felt some sort of pressure in the air. My body was getting heavier and heavier, and I couldn't fly anymore. Helplessly, I landed on the ground again. I asked Tong Tong and the serpent spirit to fly into the air to check. The 2 of them could fly high in the air, but it didn't work. It was because they couldn't see the surrounding situation. Even if they flew high in the air, they couldn't see much further than standing on the ground. I couldn't do anything about it. I could only wait for the fatty to respond. Then, I could determine his position and decide what to do next. I was confident in the fatty. He didn't lack innate talent or wisdom. Even if these spirits were really strong, the fatty would be able to resist them for a while. If he had the chance to set up a formation, he might even be able to resist longer than me. While waiting, I obviously had to do something. After sitting cross-legged to recover the Zhun Qi in my body, I was afraid that Tong Tong and the serpent spirit wouldn't be able to hold on. So, I called out to them and asked them to take a break. Tong Tong was really tired. He stopped when he heard me. However, the serpent spirit, who had been scared just now, laughed and shouted at the top of his voice, saying that he didn't need it. While shouting, he opened his mouth and swallowed the 2 ghosts next to him. He chewed a few times with a face full of enjoyment before swallowing them. He looked like a puppy that had snatched a few meat bones. It was obvious that he had tasted the sweetness of these ghosts. Although he had turned into a flood dragon, his body was the same as Tong Tong's. They were all ghosts. So, the ghosts in front of him were great supplements for him. Although Tong Tong was also a ghost, she had a kind nature. Moreover, when she was young, she had almost been swallowed by other ghosts. It had left a shadow in her heart. Naturally, she didn't want to swallow other ghosts. Chapter 686. Tong Tong retreated and walked to my side. She worriedly asked, "Is there still no news from Brother Fatty's side?" I nodded and rubbed her head, comforting her. "Don't worry. Even if we can't deal with these spirits, we can still escape. These spirits don't have a high cultivation base. They won't be able to stop us." Of course, I didn't tell her the real situation here. I didn't know anything about this place. I didn't know if it was a sealed space or not, nor did I know how to get out of here. Then I comforted her and gave her the sound transmitting talisman. I asked her to keep an eye on the talisman and inform me as soon as there was news from Fatty. Then I picked up the armor-removing sword and prepared to help the spirit snake. Although this fellow was immersed in the excitement of swallowing ghosts and didn't feel tired, the ghost he had swallowed could only increase his cultivation base. He couldn't replenish the power he had consumed. Sooner or later, he would be exhausted. However, before I could take 2 steps, Tong Tong called out to me again. She still had a worried expression on her face as she said to me, "Gidge, we still don't know what's going on with Brother Fatty. We can't keep attacking like this. I think the number of these ghosts is no less than the ghosts we encountered in front of Big Sister Swan's house. We have to think of another way. Otherwise, I'm afraid our power will be exhausted before we get any news from Big Brother Fatty. At that time, we won't be able to save ourselves, let alone Big Brother Fatty." Tong Tong had really grown up. She used to listen to my arrangements, but now she had started to think for herself. I smiled and was about to tell her that as long as we took turns to attack, we wouldn't be exhausted. However, when I was about to say something, I suddenly remembered what Tong Tong had told me about the ghosts in front of Swan's house. Back then, in the Apparition Valley, when facing an army of more than 100,000 apparitions, Tong Tong had taken the jade bracelet and placed it inside. Since the ghosts could be stored in the jade bracelet, I was sure that these ghosts could be stored as well. With this idea in mind, my eyes brightened. I turned around and told Tong Tong about it in detail. After listening to me, Tong Tong didn't look happy. Instead, she pouted her lips. After a moment of silence, she said to me, "Gidge, actually I just thought of this method, but I felt that it was a little strange." I didn't know why Tong Tong was suddenly hesitating. I asked her again. Tong Tong then told me that after we had taken those souls into the jade bracelet, she had agreed to swallow them. However, she didn't want to swallow them. However, she later discovered that the spirits that entered the jade bracelet had all dissipated into balls of coldine chi. Only then did she get rid of her psychological barrier and absorb all of them into her body. If he continued to put these spirits into the jade bracelet, it would be equivalent to killing these spirits. Of course, Tong Tong wasn't averse to simply killing Yin souls. After all, these Yin souls wanted to attack Tong Tong, and in Tong Tong's opinion, this was the same as seeking death. However, after putting them into the jade bracelet, Tong Tong would inevitably devour them in the end. It would seem as if Tong Tong was actively devouring them, which was why he was hesitating. After listening to Tong Tong, I couldn't help but sigh. After so many years, although Tong Tong's appearance had changed a lot, she was still that extremely kind little girl from the bottom of her heart. Being kind was a good thing, but being too kind to the point where one didn't know the dangers of the world was a bad thing. Tong Tong had been with me for many years. She had never lived alone, and she had never faced anything alone. That was why it wasn't a big deal for her to keep her innocent heart. However, no one knew what would happen in the future. Who knew if she would face something alone? If she was still so kind at that time, her kindness would definitely harm her. I looked at Tong Tong and hesitated for a while. Eventually, I made up my mind and gave her the jade bracelet. Don't think too much about it. If we don't use the jade bracelet to swallow those souls, they will kill us. Putting them into the jade bracelet isn't our intention to kill them. It's their own will. We don't need to think too much about these souls. We just need to swallow them. When I said those words, I deliberately emphasized them. Tong Tong was a sensitive person, so she naturally felt it. She lifted her head to look at me. She didn't say anything and just nodded. She agreed with me. If we weren't in the dangerous cultivation world, I would have let Tong Tong keep her innocence. However, when I thought that Tong Tong might have to travel the world in the future, I hardened my heart. I didn't say anything more and pulled her toward the army of ghosts. At this moment, the spirit snake was still trying to swallow the souls. Its dragon tail curled and pulled 2 souls in front of it, swallowing them in one bite. Seeing that he still had some energy left, I called him and asked him to stay with me to protect Tong Tong. When the snake spirit heard this, he was immediately unhappy. He shouted, "You don't have to go through so much trouble. Just leave these souls to me. After I devour these souls, my cultivation will definitely increase again. Maybe I can even transform into a real dragon." I looked at it angrily and scolded. "Do you have a pig brain? I'm afraid there are more than 1,000,000 souls here. How many can you swallow? Don't talk nonsense. Hurry up and protect me. After Tong Tong absorbs those souls with the jade bracelet, they will all be yours. No one will fight you for them." The spirit snake had also participated in the fire god temple. When it heard what I said, it smiled and swung its tail. It landed in front of me and smiled at Tong Tong. "Sister Tong Tong, you should start quickly. Little snake, I promise that I won't let those souls touch you." Tong Tong wasn't in a good mood. When she heard what he said, she glared at him and snorted. She ignored him and directly picked up the jade bracelet to start the absorption process. This jade bracelet had been in my hand for a long time. Since Lao AI had given it to me, it had never left my sight. But in fact, I didn't know much about this jade bracelet. I only knew that there was a large space inside that could store souls and real dragon energy. Besides that, I didn't know anything else. Moreover, I couldn't use it. I could only ask Tong Tong to absorb souls. It was the same as the last time I had swallowed souls. The jade bracelet's effect was still strong. Tong Tong only needed to wave the jade bracelet, and a large number of souls disappeared around us. The effect of swallowing souls was even greater than the number of souls the 3 of us could kill at the same time. Seeing that I had taken action, the spirit snake wasn't going to be polite. It screeched and soared, heading toward the army of souls. I guessed it was because it had swallowed too many souls that its mouth had become picky. It chose to swallow the souls that looked like generals. Just like that, the spirit snake and I used Tong to control the jade bracelet. Soon, we cleared a large number of souls in front of us. I felt much more relaxed. Controlling the jade bracelet didn't require much energy. With Tong Tong and the jade bracelet, the souls here wouldn't be a threat to us anymore. We could even take the jade bracelet and walk around to find the fatty. After resting for a while, I waited for the army of souls to reach us again. I called Tong Tong and prepared to take action again. Tong Tong raised the jade bracelet, and with a slight shake of her hands, a suction force appeared out of thin air from the jade bracelet, which turned into a gust of wind, swirling up the countless ghosts in the surroundings, turning them into a mass of gray fog and flying towards the jade bracelet. As soon as the gray mist entered the jade bracelet, it would be considered a successful swallowing. But this time, the situation was different. The gray fog had just reached the side of the jade bracelet when the jade bracelet suddenly gave birth to a pushing force, pushing it out fiercely. After this push and shove, the spirit that had been suppressed was freed. It turned into a strong gust of wind and stormed toward us. This unforeseen event happened too suddenly. Our spirit serpent was in a fluster for a moment. It took us a great deal of effort to eliminate them one by one. The other spirits in the surroundings immediately gathered around us. I felt a chill in my heart. I took a step forward and released my true chi to sweep through my body. I activated the armor removing sword to clear the surrounding souls. Then, I moved in front of Tong Tong to stop the souls that were attacking her. After I had blocked all the spirits, I stopped. I panted and thought about what to do next. Chapter 687. While I was thinking, Tong Tong stood up and looked at me with a face full of self-blame. Brother, I felt like I was about to succeed, but the jade bracelet suddenly resisted. Not only did it push the spirits back, but it also pushed my chi out. Then her eyes turned red. She looked at the endless number of spirits and said with grievance, "I'm sorry, brother. Tong Tong couldn't help you, this silly girl." I stopped thinking and rubbed her head. "It's okay. It's not your fault that the jade bracelet suddenly lost its effect. You don't need to blame yourself. Besides, even if I don't use the jade bracelet, I have other ways. You don't need to worry too much." As soon as I said that, the snake spirit heard us and understood what had happened. It laughed and moved closer to comfort Tong Tong. "Don't be afraid. It's just a bunch of ghosts. Tong Tong, watch carefully. I'm going to bite them one at a time. Before dawn, I'm sure I'll swallow them all. Not a single one will be left." After hearing our comforting words, the self-blame on Tong Tong's face lessened a little. After a short rest, she continued to fight against the spirits. Originally, Tong Tong had held back against these ghosts out of instinct. But now, because of self-reproach, she used her full strength. Streaks of lightning turned into lightning whips in her hands. She didn't even need to use the quintessence in her body. She only needed to wave her hand in a circle to destroy a large number of ghosts. At that moment, my heart was filled with anxiety. The snake spirit had said that she would swallow all the spirits before dawn tomorrow. But the problem was that when I entered this place, it was daytime. This place was probably a sealed space. If we couldn't find the exit, it would be a dark night and there would never be daylight. I was fine on my side, as I could protect myself for the time being. But as time passed, I knew nothing about the fatty's situation. Although I was confident in him, he wasn't a heavenly master yet. How long could he last? While I was pondering, a golden lightning bolt suddenly appeared in the eastern sky. With a loud explosion, Tong Tong, the snake spirit, and I stopped moving. We lifted our heads to look to the east. At this moment, thunder boomed, lighting up almost half the sky. Even the ghost army on the east side of our position was illuminated by the lightning. Judging from the sound, the lightning was very far away from us. However, I could still sense the strong aura of Tian Fa in the air. I immediately reacted. It was Fatty. It's Brother Fatty. Tong Tong's voice sounded at the same time. Although Fatty had absorbed the heavenly Tao seal in his body, with his current cultivation, he couldn't activate such a powerful tribulation lightning. However, I was still very sure that it was Fatty. This is because the power of the tribulation thunder is short and fierce. It is obvious that it came from the talisman. A month ago, when we were at the Heavenly Grand Ritual, in order to resist the conspiracy of the Schwanda Wonderland, Wonkin asked me to give an entire bag of talismans to Fatty. At that time, I had a simple look at it, and it just so happened that the Tribulation Thunder Talisman was in that bag of talismans. During the All-Heaven Tournament, no one had thought that Fatty's 9 Bends Yellow River Formation would be so powerful. He had only used a few defensive talismans to protect himself, and after activating the formation, he had won the battle. He hadn't used the extremely powerful Tribulation Thunder Talisman at that time, but had instead used it now. After thinking about it, I could guess Fatty's actions. After receiving my message, he had to face the endless ghost army. Firstly, he couldn't free himself, and secondly, he couldn't think of a way to create a commotion to contact me. That was why he had been silent for so long. However, everything was fine now. As long as I could confirm Fatty's position, I wouldn't have to stay here and get beaten up. I just had to find Fatty and start looking for the exit. Sooner or later, I would be able to leave this place. Now that there was a change in the situation, my mood was much better. I suddenly strode forward and brandished the armor-removing sword in my hand, sweeping away all the ghosts in the surroundings. Then I said to Tong Tong and the snake spirit, "Let's fight while we move. We'll head east and meet up with Fatty first. I'll take the front while the two of you cover our backs." Hearing my command, the snake's spirit roared, and the true yuan in its body surged. The originally 3-meter-long body of the flood dragon swayed in the wind and became 100 meters long. It opened its mouth and instantly swallowed a large portion of the ghost behind us. Tong Tong wasn't to be outdone either. He brandished the heavenly lightning chain in his hand, which turned into 2 streaks of lightning that charged towards the ghosts behind us. After they collided with the ghosts, they shuttled back and forth. When the lightning dissipated, there was an even larger area that had been cleared. In terms of killing the ghosts, Tong Tong was much faster than the snake spirit. With the 2 of them covering our backs, I didn't have anything to worry about. I brandished the armor-removing sword in my hand and cleared the area in front of me. Then, I brought the snake spirit and Tong Tong to head east. When the next wave of ghosts gathered, I brandished my sword again and killed them. The snake spirit pupil was behind me. I didn't need to kill as many ghosts as I wanted to protect my back and focus on defense. While we were advancing, I heard some movements coming from the east. However, they weren't as big as the previous ones. I could roughly guess that the fatty must have used some kind of talisman or something of the sort. The Tribulation Lightning Talisman wasn't the strongest one in the big bag of talismans that Officer Wong had given to the fatty. However, when it was activated, it created the biggest commotion. That was why we had noticed it earlier. With the fatty's intelligence, he knew that in such a situation, it was best to save talismans for the critical moment to save his life. However, he had used them continuously. I was afraid that the situation was extremely dangerous. I gritted my teeth, but didn't say anything. I silently increased my speed. I didn't know how many times I had swung my sword. I felt that I had moved forward at least 10 kilometers. However, there was still an endless number of ghosts in the east. There was no trace of the fatty. Although I had been using the true dragon energy in the jade bracelet to nourish my body, I had consumed a lot of it. Feeling helpless, I had to temporarily switch places with the snake spirit. I asked him to go to the front while I retreated to protect him with Tong Tong. That way, the pressure on me was reduced a lot. With the true dragon energy's nourishment, my true essence gradually recovered. As I was about to switch places with the snake spirit, I suddenly felt a vibration in Xiang Lu's leather pouch. A sound-transmitting talisman. I got it and hurried to take it out. I urged my true essence to check. Sure enough, it was the fatty who had sent me a message. "Third baby, you should have sensed the commotion when I used the talisman, right? Why haven't you come yet? I'm almost there." I only sent half of the message, and I didn't even finish the last sentence. It was obvious that the fatty had tried hard to find a gap. Before he could finish writing, the ghost had dragged him into the swamp one more time. I was even more anxious now. I hurried to reply to the fatty's message and asked him to hold on for a while. I told him that I found his location and would be there soon. After sending the message, I put away the sound-transmitting talisman and rushed to the front of the team. I brought Tong Tong and the snake spirit to the fatty's location. I made a rough estimation in my head. Just now, I had walked more than 5 kilometers, and from the fatty's previous Tribulation Lightning Talisman, he was at least 10 kilometers away. According to our current speed, it would take us at least 1.5 hours to cover the next 10 kilometers. Would Fatty be able to hold on until then? Tong Tong seemed to have felt my anxiety, so she controlled the heavenly lightning chain to destroy the large wave of ghosts behind her. She asked me, "Brother, is the situation over there very dangerous?" The emotions on my face were obvious, and I couldn't hide them. I nodded and said, "Yes." Tong Tong obviously thought of an idea and immediately said, "Brother, how about this? I'm also Een Soul, so these Een Souls won't attack me. I can hide among these Een Souls all the way and go over there to meet up with Brother Fatty first. You can bring the little snake and slowly kill your way over. What do you think?" After listening to her, my eyes brightened. I was so excited that I almost hugged her and kissed her. It was obvious that I was too worried. When I was teaching the snake spirit a lesson, I knew that the ghost didn't have any hostility towards the snake spirit and Tong Tong, but I didn't think of this method. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.